Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto obtained the Shadow Monarch system, solo leveling. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Door of Bone. The road had the kind of glare that eats outlines. Heat shimmered off ruts and wheel tracks, and the world went thin and white, as if someone had sanded color out of it. Naruto squinted anyway, because squinting made you feel like you were doing something. He walked a step off the lead wagon, right hand loose at his side, left hand balancing a lacquered lunchbox a grateful merchant had pressed into his care at dawn. The driver kept glancing down from the seat as if checking whether a body that bright and loud could really be a shinobi. "It's not going to help," Naruto said without looking up. "Staring at me won't scare bandits." "Not bandits I'm worried about," the driver muttered. "Saw white cloaks on the ridge yesterday." "Priests. Priests don't lay ambushes," Naruto said. He took another step, slow, listening. "People do." Hinata's shadow drifted up beside him, long and clean in the noon sun. Sweat trailed past the curve of her ear, but her breath stayed soft and even. She didn't squint. Byakugan didn't need to. "No chakra signatures within 200 meters, she said in a voice like cool stone. "But something's odd. Like dust moving without wind." "Heat mirage," the driver said too quickly. "Mirages don't have doctrine," Naruto murmured, and set the lunchbox on the wagon's footboard. He popped the lid, sniffed, pickled radish, rice balls with yum, and selected one. It was easier to act casual when your mouth had work. "We'll change the formation," he said after a bite. "Clones left and right, 10 paces out." "Hinata, you're my eyes. Smoke if I say, keep the kids in the middle." The driver swallowed. "You think we're..." Naruto looked up at him and smiled, not the grin he used for swagger, but something drier, older. "It's a bright day. People who love bright days like to make statements." He made the clone seal. 2 puffs of smoke and 2 blonde shadows peeled off the road, one moving like he had time to kill, the other like he'd seen this exact ditch in a dream. Hinata closed her eyes and opened them again. Veins traced delicate, precise paths around her temples. "There," she said, and nodded to the ridge to the right. "No chakra, but a shine, like metal under cloth." Seven's a sermon," Naruto said. He balanced the rice ball between finger and thumb, then flicked it up, catching it without looking. "Okay. When they start the speech, stay behind me. Priests are funny about being interrupted." He didn't get the chance to be sarcastic for long. A white flare cut the ridge, then 7 figures stepped into view, as if a curtain had been drawn back on a stage. Not shinobi. Their movements lacked the economy, but practiced. Robes that glowed with sun-marked seals at the hem, pale discs like halos slung on their backs. Their faces were ordinary in a way that felt deliberate. One raised a hand and the world went louder. It took Naruto a breath to realize that the sound was not sound at all but the hum of light against skin. "Travelers," the lead man called. "Fear not. We are purifiers. We cleanse what the night produces." "Cool," Naruto said. He offered his most political wave. "We're travelers, not products. And it's a really bright day." The lead man's smile did not reach his eyes. "Brightness has a way of drawing our attention to stains." He touched 2 fingers to his temple. "Kneel, and we will read you." A low sound came from the wagon behind Naruto. A woman half whispered a prayer, the kind that's more habit than hope. Hinata's hand brushed his elbow. She never told him not to do the thing he was about to do. She didn't have to. "No kneeling today," Naruto said. He let his voice carry, not with bravado but with a steadiness he'd practiced in empty rooms. "We're on contract. If you've got questions, take them to our Hokage." The lead purifier's mouth softened. "Pity. We've taken our questions to many leaders. Leaders have a way of loving their monsters. And of hating being called out for it." Stuff moved under the purifier's sleeves. Naruto had time to feel his back prickle before the man flicked his wrist and a sliver of something fell through the air. It wasn't a knife. It was a line, thin as a hair and bright as a welding arc. It touched the chest of a middle-aged man walking beside the back wagon. The man went rigid. A sunburst burned onto his skin through his shirt as if his flesh itself were paper being backlit. "Please," the purifier said, almost tenderly, "kneel." The man's knees shot down as if jerked by a puppeteer. He didn't cry out. His jaw clamped and his eyes wet. Naruto was already moving. Smoke bomb popped. Clone blooming into a target that threw its arms wide to catch lines of light that sang through it. The clone burst. The smoke wasn't gray. It was ochre, a color that bit into brightness. "Hinata," he said. "3 on the left, 4 on the right," she answered, standing so close he could have counted her eyelashes. "Lines originate from the discs. They're not chakra. They're rules." Naruto wanted new words for new kinds of trouble, but he didn't have time to invent them. He grabbed the branded man by his shirt and peeled fabric away from skin that smelled like hot copper. He set both palms on the sunburst. He wasn't a seal expert. He was a stubborn idiot with a talent for making stubborn idiocy look like courage. He leaned, not with chakra, but with presence. "Breathe," he told the man. "The worst thing rules do is convince you they can't be broken. Breathe." For a beat it didn't do anything but hurt. Under the wheeze of panic and the hard white noise of the day, Naruto felt something else, a tickle at the edge of hearing, like a tiny bell. It didn't come from the purifiers. It came from inside him. Quest. Protect the convoy. Failure. Death of civilians. Reward. Unknown. The lines pressed his palms like drawn wires. He grinned into the pain, fingers digging. He didn't have to understand the prompt. It understood him. "Move," he shouted, and smoke bloomed again. One clone ran hard right, zigzagging. Another picked up a kid and vanished under the wagon. Hinata stepped and turned, human compass, her voice a metronome. "Down 1. No, now." 2 lines converging. Left, left, Naruto, now. He slammed an elbow into a disc-bright strike that came for his head and felt his skin crackle but not break. The younger of the white robes stumbled as if he'd punched a bad dream. Naruto would have liked to punch him again, just to make the metaphor literal, but the leader was moving, stepping down the ridge with the precision of a man who had practiced walking like divine gravity loved him. "Shinobi," the lead said. "Release the monster. Step aside." A child cried out. Naruto didn't look. He moved on a line drawn in his head, one he'd learned on missions where things broke without drama. "If you're here to take something," he said, "you'll have to get past me." "Gladly," the purifier said, and the 7 discs on 7 backs flared. Only then did Naruto understand how the light worked. It was not a beam. It was a decision. The lines sought movement, cut arcs that predicted where legs would be, where hearts would beat. In their way, they were smart. He did something stupid in return, stepped forward into more of them. He popped 2 more clones as he walked and watched the lines that killed them. The clones didn't die like paper. They died like promises fulfilled, clean, fast, useful. "Tired of talking?" Naruto asked. He always talked too much when he was buying time. "Me too." H yanked a smoke bomb hard enough to bruise his palm, slammed it to the packed earth, and watched the noon go dull. The purifiers didn't stop. Light burned through ochre, though it frayed. Hinata caught his sleeve and tugged. "Down," she said. He dropped without argue. Ing and a line sang about the place his head had just been. They made it 30 paces like that, the smoke a poor umbrella, the disc light chewing at its edges, until the ground made a sound like a throat clearing. Naruto felt the vibration through his shin on the packed earth. The road collapsed in a neat, circular movement. Sinkhole, he thought, or someone's idea of a trap sprung late. The lead purifier didn't lunge for the opening. He redirected. He wanted the branded man, the child. The zeal in his eyes never became heat. Naruto hated that. He preferred his enemies either honest enough to enjoy hurting people or ashamed enough to stutter. "Hinata, the hole leads to a cavity," she said, Byakugan mapping what his eyes couldn't. 10 meters down. Stone. Runes. "There's a door." "No, teeth." Of course there were. The world had a rhythm. Save a caravan from zealots. Fall into a tomb. Get them into the hole, Naruto said, and when Hinata looked at him like he'd sprouted a second idiot's head, he said, "It's cover. We'll clear it. You hate caves. I hate dying more," he returned, and pitched himself backward into the opening. 10 meters is not much if you jump on purpose. He dropped like a stone, bent his knees, slashed his hands out to bleed impact, and rolled. The air tasted like old offerings. Dust swirled sharp in the throat. 4 carved pillars ringed a chamber as clean as a law. On the far side, something like a door hunched half open, ribs of white bone arching into an oval, the spaces between carved with kneeling figures. It was beautiful in the way knives sometimes were. He didn't have long to look. Hinata's voice came from above. Naruto. He threw his arms up as 2 bodies fell. He caught the kid under the armpits, felt ribs like twigs, handed him to thin air that turned into a clone. Civilians dropped in a neat rain, the driver cursing God, gods, shinobi, gravity. Hinata came last, and for a second her hand found his shoulder and balanced there, firm. He didn't know he'd been holding his breath until the touch made him release it. Light cut after them, slicing down like ladders. Naruto grabbed a spent smoke bomb and whipped it at the invisible rungs. The light didn't care. It stepped down geometry. He didn't have a jutsu for this. He had a stupid, stubborn idea. Everybody, he said, on your knees. No one argued, not with light making the air sing that way. Even so, Naruto knew how to count stubborn souls by sound. 1 man didn't move, the branded one. Naruto turned and met his eyes. They were the eyes of a person who had been told to kneel too many times and was done. Naruto felt an answering flare of temper that had nothing to do with light or dignity. Accept him, Naruto said, and it was not clever leadership, it was reflex. You stand with me. The lead purifier reached the lip and peered down with gentle offense. Blasphemers hide in holes, he said, and drew a pattern in the air with 2 fingers. Lines slipped down, neat ladders of noon. The door of ribs watched with all the eyes of the carved figures along its arch. Its threshold demanded a posture. Naruto stepped toward it, past kneeling civilians, past Hinata with her arms spread like a threat softer than blades. Runes along the floor glowed a warning. He stopped before he teetered into the wrong story. Don't, Hinata said, not because she didn't trust him, but because she loved the part of him that didn't let other people tell him where to put his knees. I won't, he said, and meant it like an oath. The room did something then that it had probably done for a NY1 who had come here scared and stubborn. It tried to make the choice easy. The light from above cut clean bands across the floor, each band as wide as a kneeler's body. Step, kneel, survive. That was the deal. Naruto studied shadows instead. His shadow fell long and thin across the stone. Where it crossed runes, the runes dimmed as if embarrassed. He moved his left foot a finger's width. His shadow crawled across a line like a cat deciding whether to nap or hunt. The runes guttered. You see it? He asked Hinata. Her eyes flicked, tracking where the world turned faint. You can block the expectation. Something like that. He didn't like the words he was thinking. Door, kneeling, rules, so he used simpler ones. They put a bell on the mat. I'll step around the bell. He moved. The light from above stitched ladder rungs. The door waited with the patience of things that expect to be obeyed. Naruto swung his right foot into a shaft of light so bright it should have licked his skin raw. It was like stepping into hot milk. His shadow fell long. It lapped over the carved kneelers. Runes dimmed to embers. He took another step, mindful of where his heel put darkness. He arced his path, so that his shadow bent like a bow over the threshold, covering the kneelers' bowed heads. The door didn't open. It watched him. Stupid, Hinata breathed, but it was soft, and there was a small porty on of pride in it that felt like medicine in winter. Above, the purifiers dropped lines. One touched a kneeling man's shoulder. He didn't move. Naruto would flinch later thinking about that part. 4. Now he put his left foot down in the last clip of shadow where it mattered and breathed out steady. All right, he said to the door. How about this? I don't kneel, but I'm not asking for nothing. He took another step, letting his shadow cover the last carved head. Something in the room recognized the effort without loving it. The door shuddered, bone against bone, and slid with the groan of something unpracticed. Beyond, the air was colder. It smelled like the bottom of wells and the iron coins people toss into them. The lead purifier hissed a word and light spears narrowed. Sleeker now, pay. Raps now convinced the world was obstinate. Hinata called. 2, left, duck, and Naruto ducked because his body trusted her body without debate. A spear hit the bone arch and skittered, leaving a scorch that smoked like a burned prayer. Naruto threw himself through the opening and rolled into a low room that stepped down and again down. The walls were etched with scenes he didn't have the leisure to admire. Long figures walking between stalks that could have been wheat or spears, a sky with too many small suns. Behind him civilians scrabbled and slid, Hinata's hands never leaving the edges of their fear. When the branded man stumbled, Naruto caught him one-handed and hauled him along like he weighed less than the lunchbox. The second chamber was not a chamber at all but a path between two low platforms. The warmth of the day vanished in a breath. Naruto felt gooseflesh stutter along his forearms and for a half-second he was again 12 and caught in a cave in wave country and sick with the cold. He shoved that memory into a different drawer and took the right-hand path, because the left had a sheen on the floor that meant someone had recently bled there. "Stop," Hinata said suddenly, her gaze snapping hard to the ceiling. Naruto did, and a spear made of light like sunlight drawn through glass rasped where his forehead had been. A white-robed figure dropped lightfoot into the room from above, graceful as a lie. He did not carry a blade. He carried a pen. "Your defiance pleases nothing," he said, and drew a line in the air. It hung there, a glowing word in a script that Naruto had never seen. "Kneel." The branded man went sideways as if someone had pulled his ankles. Naruto's knee hit stone so hard pain rang up his hip. Hinata stayed on her feet. Naruto got to his KNES and then to the knowledge that he had, in fact, been brought there by a word. Something flared in him that wasn't anger. It was older and bitter, and it didn't want to be commanded. Status abnormality detected. Compulsion. Countermeasure. Command. Command available. 1. The bell sound again, tiny and exact. Naruto put a palm on the floor, then pushed to standing, slow, deliberate. The white-robed scribe's eyebrows lifted. No one broke commandments. That was the whole point of commandments. Naruto said the first word that came to him, the one he had been saying with his body since he'd stepped toward the door. Stand. The sound came out of him like an order a father might use at a kitchen table if the kid kept slumping. It wasn't loud. It was shaped. Something listened. The branded M. And jerked to his feet with all the surprise of someone who found his body had forgotten to remember gravity. Hinata's mouth softened. She had been on her feet already, but for a second Naruto saw the command pass through her too. Like warmth. The scribe's pen hung. He looked offended and a little bit delighted, the way a teacher looks when a student shows up with an argument. "Interesting," he murmured. "It will be a joy to bleach you." Quote. Light lines snapped down from his hand. Naruto met them with clones and movement and a will that had been told for years what he was and what he wasn't and had learned, prickly, to disagree. He rushed the scribe left, not because left was safer, it was worse, but because the scribe had written right first and Naruto was in the mood to teach someone about improvisation. He didn't think about kneeling anymore. He thought about feet on stone, about Hinata's voice calling angles, about civilians crouched against a wall that was older than their grandparents' grandparents. He thought about the tiny bell and the way the air had gone colder inside the bone door. He reached the scribe and did what he always did to mages who liked distance. He got in his face and stayed. The pen flicked toward his eye. Naruto turned his head a fraction and the pen scraped his cheek and drew blood in a line so thin he could have mistaken it for a stray hair. The scribe smiled with small teeth. "Light writes best on dark," he said, and Naruto smiled back because he liked comedy when it waited for the punchline. He punched him. The scribe's head snapped back and hit the ceiling so hard a dent answered. Light letters shattered in the air like brittle glass. Naruto got a hand on his robe and brought him down and hit him again. The robe felt soft and expensively pious. The man went limp. The pen skittered out of reach. It would have been smart to tie him. Naruto didn't tie him. He did something dumber and more honest and not a little cruel. He looked down at the unconscious man and felt the bell again. But it rang from the opposite direction. From under the floor, almost. From inside him, as if the room had given him permission to hear without kneeling a second time. Shadow extraction available. Target. Purifier scribe. Conditions. Darkness proximity, sufficient. Will clash, pending. Hinata saw his face change. He didn't know what it did, exactly, tightened, maybe. The way it did when he made the kind of choice that made people write reports later. Naruto, she said. Yeah, he said, and closed his eyes because it was easier to be honest in the dark. He reached not with hands but with the stubborn part of him that did not put knees on floors for strangers with soft voices. He grabbed hold of the part of the scribe that had written the word kneel and dragged. The room shifted. It wasn't a physical movement. It was the way stairs tilt under you in dreams. Naruto's shadow pulled up and out, thin at first and then thickening like smoke being rolled into a rope. Something tried to jerk back. Not the scribe, who slept. The habit of light in him. It fought like a trout hooked badly. Naruto grimaced and pulled harder, and the bell he'd been hearing tilted to a lower tone that made his teeth hurt. Breathe, he heard himself say, and he wasn't sure whether he meant himself or the thing he was taking. It didn't matter. Both of them listened. The darkness in the room heaved. It wasn't much darkness to begin with, just stone shadow and the dim left by smoke. It was enough. His shadow throbbed, leaned, and then drew away from the scribe and rose, stuttering, on legs that weren't legs. It came up like a man remembering a position he hadn't used in years. It saluted, not military crisp, more like a reflex, the way hands sometimes do when they are a member in action before the brain files it. Naruto stared. The shadow had the outline of the scribe, but not the glow. A pen-shaped void hung at its hip. A sunbrand lay on its chest like a scar that had been burned and gone cold. It didn't have eyes, not really, but he felt a gaze anyway. Not grateful, not murderous. Waiting. Name, Naruto said, not knowing why the word felt important. The shadow's head tilted. The bell tone shifted again. Name the shadow. If unnamed, shadow will default to given designation. Naruto had exactly the amount of poetry in him required to name things under pressure. Shiba, he said, because the man had tried to pen him to the floor and Naruto didn't forgive, but he did allow for people's names to become other things. You're Shiba. The shadow bowed, not to the bone door. To Naruto. Hinata let out a breath he hadn't heard her take. You just took him, she said, not horrified. Apprehension on her tongue and curiosity underneath, both honest. He wasn't using the shadow part, Naruto said, which was the kind of explanation that would make him sound insane in a report. We are useful, Hinata assessed after a heartbeat. Then, because she was high, Nada and had a ruthlessly accurate heart, she added, we will talk about the parts that are not. Later, Naruto agreed. The bell faded. The room didn't get warmer, but it felt less like it was waiting for him to do the wrong thing. Above, the lead purifier's voice cut through stone, uncanny clear. Shinobi, you do not understand the engine you have touched. Naruto looked up. You keep saying that like it will make me put it down. Light ladders descended again, not as experimental now, more mechanical. The others had regrouped. Shiba turned its not face toward the light and didn't flinch. Naruto felt the specific inversion of emotion that meant you had done a thing you could not undo, and he didn't regret it but he did respect the permanence. He raised his hand and the shadow's head snapped up as if pulled by a string. The movement had a neatness that lit up something in him, a new set of muscles eager to be used. He wondered if it would scare him later. It didn't now. Block, Naruto said, not a shout, a request phrased like a plan. Shiba moved with the kind of speed that doesn't belong to flesh. He stepped into a shaft of light and reversed it. Not with power, with absence. The line sang. The air smelled like heated iron. The light hit void and, for a stuttering second, had nothing to burn. It split around Shiba and gnashed harmlessly at stone. Shiba held, a black figure under white. And Naruto realized with a steadiness that felt like hunger that he had just gotten a shield. Hinata, he said. I see paths, she said, already mapping. 3 lines each, staggered. The civilians can crawl along the right wall. If Shiba can hold that angle, he can, Naruto said. He didn't know how he knew it, except he did. Shiba, there. The shadow moved to the exact place Hinata had indicated. Naruto had the sensation of thinking with an extra hand. He hated extra voices in his head. He loved extra hands when people's lives were at stake. They moved. The civilians crawled. The branded man stayed on his feet with a rigid grace, as if the word stand hadn't fully faded from his bones. Hinata walked backward, eyes up to the ceiling and beyond, following light back to intention. Naruto advanced because the only way someone like him ever really survived was by closing distance. A second purifier slid down a ladder F light with less grace than the scribe and threw a hook O. F radiance like a fisherman spoiling for a story. Shiba took it. The hook slid into void and came out snarling emptiness. The purifier stared a second longer than it is wise to stare at your own broke. N-Tool and Naruto moved into that second and cut him down with the side of his hand and the heel of his boot. He didn't kill him. He didn't have to. Blood takes time and time was not theirs. A third L eeped into the room with a longer arc and a certain reckless joy. Naruto liked him least. Joy has its place. He didn't like it here. The man flicked his disc and drew a circle of light in the air and rolled it. The ring skipped like a pebble across water and then climbed the wall like a buzz saw given a reason to be indignant. It would cut the right wall and the civilians with it. Hinata's voice went tight. Naruto, I see it, he snapped, and then felt the bell again, but different, higher, almost euphoric. A prompt slid behind his eyes like a blade being sheathed. New skill unlocked. Shadow swap. Description. Exchange positions with a bound shadow within range. Cost. Focus. Cooldown. Short. Okay, he said to no one, and, Shiba, trade. The world hiccuped. He didn't move his feet. The room decided he had been in a different place since birth. He was where Shiba had been, void wall under his hands, light ring chewing toward him. Shiba stood where Naruto had been, his presence hollow and loyal. Naruto shoved both palms into the ring. It was like catching a wheel. He didn't stop it, he angled it. The ring hit the ceiling and gouged it, then, like all disciplined tools, tried to complete its original command and failed and died. The purifier who had thrown it blinked. Naruto had enough compassion to know bewilderment kills slower than knives, and sometimes better. Go to sleep, he said, and swept the man's legs and put two knuckles into the point just below his ear. The purifier folded like he had been told a complicated philosophy in a tongue he didn't speak. The last two hesitated. The lead climbed down last, not a fool but also not the kind of man who lets other people do his dirty work alone. He didn't draw shapes. He didn't draw anything. He just looked at Naruto with the quiet of someone who believes he can wait out your rebellion. You have taken a shadow, he said. Perhaps several. Naruto didn't answer. He was counting the breaths of panicked people. The thready pair of steps that meant the branded man was not yet out of danger. Shiba stood where he'd left him, perfectly still, as if carved out of the air. You think shadows are neutral, the lead continued. They are not. They are debts. They will come due. Naruto smiled, not kind. You were never very good at making me want the things you wanted me to want. The purifier's eyes slid over Hinata, over the civilians, over the carved bone. There was a sharpness in him that did not belong to gentle words. If you walk the night any further, you will not be allowed to walk our roads. Your roads? Naruto asked. He jerked his chin at the kneeling figures carved into the door. I'm going to guess the people who built this place wouldn't agree. They built this place to contain something, the man said. All prisons are churches if you make the walls reverent. And all churches are prisons if you lock the doors, Naruto said, and the man's mouth softened again, as if he wanted to convert him over tea. He flicked two fingers. Ladders disappeared. He stepped backward up a sheer pillar with practiced grace and was gone. The two remaining followed, one of them glancing back with a look that was not hate. Naruto filed it away. Looks mattered. Sometimes more than words. Especially in churches. The room breathed. It was a human sound. Not mystical. People remembering they had lungs. Okay, Naruto said. He clapped his hands once, because the sound snaps panic in two. We're leaving before they decide to turn the hole into a sunbeam. Hinata, you take point. Civilians in pairs. He pointed at the branded man. And changed the gesture to something gentler when the man flinched. You walk with me. They moved through one more chamber, lower than the last, the ceiling close enough to scrape knuckles. Hinata glided ahead, fingers tracing air to mark safe paths. Shiba walked like a shadow in someone else's dream, leaving footprints only when Naruto's gut made sense of their weight. The branded man did not talk. Naruto didn't ask him to. He had the look of someone who had been told too many times what to be in other people's worlds. The last chamber opened into a shaft, with a ragged ceiling where the road had fallen in. Dust flared where light met air. Naruto squinted up and saw squares of sky, and the suggestion of white robes passing like clouds. He didn't feel like waiting for clouds to be kind. "Hina, I can see," she said, already threading a route with words. "That beam will break in 20 seconds if Shiba stands there." "Naruto, we'll need." "Got it," he said. He pulled a scroll from his vest and flicked it open. Chains unrolled with a smack and snapped to the stone with tiny paper tags. He slapped 3 across the walls to make a ladder, not elegant work but strong. He put the 4th across, just above Hinata's head, and offered his knee to a woman with a boy in her arms. "Go. There's a market topside with a man who's selling salted plums. Find him. Tell him Naruto sent you and you need a stall to hide under." "I don't have money," the woman whispered, fierce and mortified at once. "Tell him the blonde idiot owes him a favor," Naruto said. "We all work on credit." She scrambled up. The others followed, some with stubborn dignity, some with knees that trembled. The branded man looked up the shaft, then down at Naruto's extended hand. He too ca'd like a man who had made up his mind to be angry about it and hadn't figured out a good reason not to be. "Strong," Naruto said as he boosted him. "Good." The man's mouth twitched. It looked unfamiliar, like a smile made in a forge and never worn. "I didn't kneel," he said, half a question. "Good habit," Naruto said, and it felt like a joke and not like a slogan. He shoved him up to the last chain and watched Hinata go after him like a tide. Shiba stepped under the chain he'd said he would and held still. Light spilled around him like someone had spilled milk on a museum floor. Naruto went last, as always. Because leaders of small, temporary kingdoms did that, or they weren't leaders. They came up into day that made his eyes water. The road was a wreck of dirt and splintered wood. The wagons creaked in worry and the driver cried in relief and relief's exhaustion. A smear of white cloth showed where one of the purifiers had snagged himself on reality while he retreated. "Move," Naruto said. "Shiba." He didn't have to tell the shadow to vanish. It folded down into Naruto's outline like it had never been anything else. Civilians stared. Naruto pretended they weren't. He had learned that sometimes ignoring a miracle made it less frightening for people who needed to get through the next hour. They put distance between themselves and the sinkhole before anyone asked questions. He market that had salted plums also had a man who would, for the price of a favor, let half a dozen shaken strangers sit behind his stacks while a blonde shinobi stood outside and claimed to be his apprentice. Hinata stood beside him and watched the road. She did not watch him, not exactly, but her attention settled in the place where his arm met his body as if there was something important in whether he leaned or not. "You look different," she said. "Shadow on my cheek," he said, touching the thin line the pen had left. "Looks cool, right?" "Idiotic," she said, a laugh hiding somewhere in the word where only he could hear it. "And yes." A boy with a plum in each fist stared at Naruto like he had watched a thunderstorm grow a face. Naruto squatted so they were eye level. "You okay?" he asked. The boy nodded. His lips were stained purple. "You told my dad to breathe," he said, as if that mattered more than the light or the noise or the door with bones. "Someone told me once," Naruto said. "I like recycling good ideas." The boy whispered, conspiratorially, "Are you a monster?" "No," Naruto said. He kept his voice conversational. "But I'm good at scaring monsters who think they're people." The boy considered that, then decided it was an answer that would keep him standing. He ran back to his mother with a plum held high. The branded man found Naruto's shoulder with his hand. It was not a comfortable gesture in either of their bodies. It did not have to be. "Name," the man said, as if naming would break some curse. "Naruto," he said. "Yours." The man looked at the sun as if asking permission. Then back at Naruto as if deciding not to care whether it was given. "Taro," he said. "I will not forget." "Good," Naruto said, because people who do not forget tend to live longer, not because he wanted gratitude. Gratitude made boundaries soft, and he had enough soft parts without other people lending him theirs. They left at dusk. He'd always liked the hour when the village turned gold and then blue. When the day forgave personal failures and the night hadn't yet written a list. The trip back to Konoha took the hard edges out of the morning and replaced them with tired jokes. And the way people walk when their knees remember stone. Hinata's voice finally went quiet an hour from the gates. She had been giving small updates without thinking. 2 travelers ahead, no chakra, bird in the grass. Don't step. And when she went quiet, it didn't mean danger had gone up. It meant the kind of safe where you notice your own breath. Naruto let the quiet rest. What did it feel like? She asked without preface. The way you ask the only person who might be able to tell you. Taking him. He considered lying. It would be easier to pretend he'd done a trick and not something that took a piece out of him and left something else, blacker and cleaner, in its place. He didn't like lying to her, and he liked it less now that the part of him that had said stand had seen her not kneel without being prompted. Like pulling a story out of the dark, he said. One that didn't like being told. She looked at him with the particular intensity she reserved for truth. Does it want? Not the way people want, he said. It waits, and it listens, and when I say something simple, it hears me. Hinata nodded. Then say simple things, she advised, as if she were telling him how to steer a cart with a difficult wheel. Don't give it poetry, give it sentences. He laughed, just breath. Yes, ma'am. They reached the gate as lanterns bloomed along the street and a woman scolded her husband. ND for buying fish too late, and a dog decided that it loved everyone indiscriminately. The guards had the kind of alert posture that said someone had sent a message ahead. Naruto watched one twitch toward a bell cord and one not. And he hoped the one who didn't got promoted. They were waved through without fuss, which meant the fuss would come later and arrive in a room with pretty scrolls and tea he'd forget to drink. He didn't make it to his apartment before the night decided to be direct. A figure in a cat mask sat on his sill like a motif. She was all right angles even when she was pretending to lounge. Blade strapped across her back like the final argument. Anbu didn't use their names when they were masked, but there are things a village knows without being told. Yugao Azuki turned her head as he climbed. And he knew it was her because her attention had weight and because she had once shown him how to clean a sword he didn't own, as if it were a lesson in grief he did. Hey, Naruto said, swinging in with the ease of a man for whom windows were doors with aspirations. You want a rice ball? I have a lunchbox I definitely am going to return to someone else and definitely is not mine. You're late, Yugao said, ignoring the offer. Her voice did not rustle, even through the mask. And you walked into the village with a shadow that is not your own. Naruto let his hand drop. The apartment was small and it made him look bigger. A shadow standing up would have made him look monstrous. He was careful without making it an apology. It's fine, he said. You don't know that, she said. I know it. Listened, he said. He should not have told her that. He did. It felt like telling the village ladder which rung was cracked. Yugao swung in and landed without sound. She smelled like steel on rain and something green that was not perfume. She set 2 fingertips against his chest right over where the scribe had written kneel. The skin there ached with remembered heat. Her fingers were cool. Word reached the tower, she said. White robes on the North Road. A hole. Civilians who will live to tell stories they are not qualified to tell. And a thing walking 2 steps behind you like it knows your heart. Naruto didn't look at the corner where Shiba stood because he had not said stand and he wanted it to be a thing he earned, not a thing that happened because the village needed an easy allegory. He looked at Yugao instead, which was the harder thing. What did the Hokage say? He asked. The mask tilted. She said to ask you a question I'm not supposed to enjoy asking. A beat. Why did you come home with a soldier that doesn't breathe? Naruto wanted to make a joke. He didn't. He had jokes. He didn't have enough blood left for the kind that deflects the real question. Because breathing soldiers were getting hurt, he said. And because I didn't kneel for a door that told me to and then it opened. And because if someone's going to be king of my night, it's going to be me. Yugao didn't move for 3 breaths. Then she tapped the flat of 2 fingers against his chest where the hurt was. Don't tell her, King, she said. Tell her, useful. It will lower her blood pressure. Noted. Also, she leaned, a magnitude of closeness that would have made him step back if it were anyone else. Don't use big words on your new dog. It's not a dog, he said automatically. Then don't treat it like a man, she said. Men who like being told what to do end badly in my experience. Make it a tool, Naruto. Don't make it a prayer. Her mask turned toward the corner then, not because he looked, but because she had the kind of instincts that made her good at making other people nervous. His shadow didn't move. Shiba did not breathe. He didn't need to. Yugao's shoulders eased fractionally. Good, she said. You can come to the tower now, or you can come in the morning. If you come now, you'll sleep better. If you come in the morning, you'll sleep. Choose. He thought about the lunch box he was going to have to wash. He thought about Hinata's face in the doorway when she had reached the last chain and not looked back until he touched it. He thought about the man who had asked him if he was a monster and the boy who had not. He thought about the bone door and the kneeling figures and the way runes dimmed under his shadow as if they wanted him to step or they feared it. I'll come now, he said. Yugao's head dipped. It was possible she approved. Then put away your soldier, she said, and there was no mockery in the phrase. Only accuracy. Naruto turned his head a fraction toward the corner. He didn't say anything fancy. He didn't give Shiba a speech. He had been given a piece of advice by someone with a practical heart. Stay, he said, as if he were telling a friend to hold the line in a bar fight, or a dog not to chase a cartwheel, and he hated that those things both felt appropriate. Shiba folded down lie dust being put back on the hook by someone who intended to use it again soon. Yugao watched. We're going to make a mess, she said. Not warning. Statement. She stepped back onto the sill. Night had come while they'd been talking. And the lanterns in the street were soft and the stars were trying to have an argument with city light and losing. Naruto smiled, not loud. We always do, he said, and swung out, not because he wanted to be dramatic but because his feet knew that drop and it felt like being 12 and 16 and whatever this was, all at once. He landed a beat after Yugao. Hinata was in the street under a lamp. She looked up and saw him and did not look surprised. She fell into step between him and the woman with the mask because that is where she belonged and no one in that trio questioned it. When they turned onto the avenue toward the tower, a white-robed figure watched from the roofline of a bathhouse and didn't move. Naruto felt the look like the memory of the pen's line under his skin. He did not change his pace. He did not reach for a smoke bomb or a smile. He walked into the night the way a man walks into a room that knows him, head up, hands open, not kneeling. The bell chimed once, very quietly. He didn't know where it came from. He didn't need to. He heard it all the same. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Sand, Wind, and the Taste of Iron. The Hokage's office was made of paper screens and pressure. Night turned the windows into black mirrors. Naruto watched his silhouette move when he breathed and tried not to think about how the outline looked heavier than it used to. Tsunade set down the report Yugao had brought. She didn't sit. She leaned both hands on the desk and studied him like she would a patient who insisted he felt fine while bleeding on the floor. You brought something back from the road, she said. And it listens. Sometimes better than people, he said, because he was too tired for safer jokes. Yugao stood to his right, mask hanging at her hip now, sorta straight line against her back. He controlled it, she said. He didn't worship it. That distinction is the difference between a weapon and a war, Tsunade said. Her mouth softened a fraction. Good. You're going to Suna. Naruto blinked. Is this punishment or a vacation? Neither. They've lost 3 caravans at high noon. Tsunade tapped the map. Purifiers. They chase shadows because they need an enemy they can describe with light. Suna asked for help. Officially they asked for an escort. Unofficially they asked for someone who can make noon less, noon. Me, Naruto said, not quite a question. You, Tsunade confirmed. You're taking Hyuga Hinata. Anbu coordination is on offer if needed. Her eyes cut to Yugao. A thread of approval stitched the air. You'll meet a sand liaison at the border. Tamari will not enjoy needing you. She'll do it anyway. That's why I like her. I like her too, Naruto said. He didn't add because she argues like she's trying to save your life. He didn't need to. Tsunade's gaze slid to the thin line on his cheek where a pen had written a lesson in pain. Don't name whatever you make before you understand the bill. And if any of those white-robed idiots step into fire country again. Bring me a live one. I have questions. Questions make great weapons, Yugao murmured. Tsunade cracked a smile that was not kind. They do, she said. Dismissed. They left together into the corridor where night had a smell. Ink, sandalwood, a little of the sake Tsunade pretended she didn't keep in a locked drawer. Yugao walked half a step behind, as if she could choose to be a shadow or a sword depending on whether the lanterns flared or popped. You sleep? She asked. Naruto considered the question and smiled with one side of his mouth. I sleep next to the window. Does that count? She nodded, as if he'd passed a test, and peeled off at the stairwell. Hinata waited outside. Waiting looked good on her. It made her still without making her small. She had a pack by her feet and a thermos in both hands. We leave at first light, she said. I brought tea. He took a sip. It was hot and a little bitter and perfect. Tsunade's sending us to Suna, he said. You're going to hate the sun by the time we're done. Hinata looked up at the blank sky. I was already suspicious. He laughed, soft, because she meant it. They were on the road before the village's roost. RS remembered they were supposed to be helpful. The world went from blue to yellow in degrees, and Naruto watched shadows shrink across the fields like a map teaching a child about seasons. Shiba rode, low and quiet in the border of his footsteps. He didn't call him out. Not yet. He walked with Hinata and listened to her talk about wind in terms of angles and windows and what it does to eyes, and When she fell quiet he let it be a silence that said what words couldn't. They met Tamari at a waypoint marked by a dead tree that had decided to be a sculpture rather than give up. She stood with her fan planted in the sand and her chin tilted the way people tilt their chins when they refuse to be impressed by anything in case it turns out to be a trick. You're late, she said when they were early. Naruto grinned. Had to stop and make a shadow listen to me. She blinked, then snorted. I'd say I don't want to know, but I do. Her eyes flicked to Hinata. Hyuga. Hinata bowed just enough. Tamari. Tamari rapped her knuckles against the fan's rib. We've got a problem in the Badlands. White robes with discs. They like noon. They like sermons. They like turning caravans into burnt lines and declarations about cleansing. Our people are spooked. My people don't spook easy. Naruto leaned on a rock like he was tired of pretending rocks weren't chairs. You want to cross at dusk, he said. Temari's eyebrows climbed. I wanted to, yes. Suna Council will want you to cross at noon because pride is a poor weather instrument. I can grease the argument. You'll make it stick. I hate when my reputation helps, Naruto said. It helps because you can back it, Tamari said, and that was a better compliment than most poetry. The Badlands started at a line you couldn't see until you felt it. The way some rooms have an argument tucked into the air. Sand gave way to glass spines half buried like the skeleton of a beast the size of a street. Heat went from a background opinion to a voice that liked to sing close to your ear. They met Suna scouts with faces scarfed and eyes that drank every movement and underestimated none. Tamari made the case at the outpost. She didn't say dusk like prayer. She said it like plan. They use light like law, she said to a counselor who had turned up just to be stubborn in person. We will break the law by changing jurisdiction. The counselor pursed his mouth. We do not hide from zealots. He said. We don't hide, Tamari returned. We win, or we let them make our dead into lessons. Naruto didn't speak until the man looked at him for the second time. They're better at noon, he said. We're better when the sun stops shouting. Give me dusk and I'll give you caravans. The man's mouth twitched like it wanted to pick a fight and remembered sandstorms. He looked at Hinata and thought better of trying to guilt the quiet one. Fine, he said. Dusk. By the time the sky relaxed from white to bronze, they had 3 wagons loaded with seal chit. And a driver who had lost too much to leave his seat even for a drink of water. Naruto walked on the right flank, close enough to the wheel to feel the rhythm of its wobble. Hinata took the high ground, where high ground meant a dune that shifted under the pressure of your opinion. Tamari moved like she owned the map and was still deciding what to name the towns. They crested a long slope and the world below arranged itself into the kind of trap that thinks it's subtle because it writes pretty letters. Lines crisscrossed a canyon floor, luminous as if someone had taken sun and drawn in straight edges. At every junction a figure in white stood with a disc glowing like a halo that couldn't decide whether to be metaphor or weapon. 7, Hinata said, because apparently the creed came in packs. No. 8. 8 is a choir, Tamari said. She flicked open her fan of hair. Wind tasted the air in return, interested. Naruto rolled his shoulders, checked the weight of the short blade across his back, and let his eyes adjust to a depth of shadow that only existed because the light was arrogant. We keep the high edge, he said. We make dusk where we need it. How? Tamari asked, flat, grateful for practicalities. Make the sky a wall, Naruto said, and bounced his knuckles against the side of the wagon. Dust drifted. You can do it without taking my head off. Tamari smirked. Why? Are you attached? Some days, he said. And she laughed low and true. The first white robe raised a hand. His voice carried as if he were standing in a small church rather than in a canyon where wind had made a habit of ignoring people. Lay down your goods, he intoned. Lay down your lies. Kneel. Be red. Do they know any other verbs? Naruto muttered. Burn, Tamari offered. They like that one. Add it to the list of things I'm not doing, Naruto said, and cupped a palm. Hinata tossed him a smoke pellet without looking, and he didn't pop it yet because sometimes holding a thing is better than using it. We need movement on the left, he said. Hina, too underground, she said, not power, clarity. Burrowers, not chakra constructs. Desert fauna, big, good, Naruto said, because the desert might be hostile but it was honest. He jogged 5 paces right, dropped to a knee that was his choice, pressed his palm to the stuttering heat where glass bit the sand, and whispered something that wasn't a word. He didn't know he could do it until he did. The system listened, as if it had been waiting like a patient shopkeeper while he counted coins he didn't know he had. Shadow extraction available. Target. Sand Scorpion Alpha. Conditions. Corpse, husk present. Darkness. Marginal. Will clash. Minimal. The husk under the sand was old glass and cruelty. He pricked his palm and let a sting of blood drip. It hit the husk with a sound like a finger tapping a glass bottle. He pulled, and the pull wasn't hard because the scorpion had wanted to keep hunting long after its body failed to. Darkness gathered under his hand like a bad idea being turned into an argument. The shadow rose, taller than a man's shoulder, legs clicking against nothing like knives on plates. Its carapace. E was a slick of midnight that threw back no light. When it lifted its head, its eyes were not eyes, they were slick hollows. Name, Naruto said, because he was not going to get in the habit of nding things he didn't have the respect to name. Really, Tamari said, half exasperation, half admiration. You're making pets in the middle of an ambush. Pets don't hold lines, Naruto said. Hounds do. Gaara, he decided, because the thing scraped the sand like broken glass. You're Gaara. The glass hound rattled its legs and turned its head toward the canyon. Lines of light thickened. The Cho-ir of white robes began to sing without moving their mouths. Wind, Naruto said. Tamari flicked the fan and the ridge exhaled. Not a gust. A plan. Dust rose from the dune like someone lifting a blanket at the corner. It got bigger as it went, picked up grit and glass dust and the sort of powder that lives between sand and stone and waits to be called fog. The world went from noon to afternoon to something like late day in a breath. Naruto felt his domain consider it. Domain of dusk. Stabilizing. Integrity. 43% right pointing arrow 67%. Better, he said, and something inside him stretched like a cat that had been stuck in a box all day. Shiba. Forward. The first lines hit Gaara. Where they met hollow, they hissed. Gaara didn't move like an animal, it moved like an argument Naruto had with himself and then decided to win. It carved a path through luminous lines with its body and made a wedge where there hadn't been one. Hinata dropped into a slide and came up in a kneel that wasn't surrender. 4 at the base, 2 on the ridge. 2 anchoring, she called. Anchors must break or the rest will right around us. Anchors, then, Tamari said, and her second cut of wind wasn't a wall, it was a scalpel. The dust turned to a sheet where the anchors stood. Light lost its hard edges. Naruto's domain snapped into place like a room that knows your name when you step through the door. He didn't say the word in his head, but the system did it for him anyway. Command unlocked. Scatter. Effect. Breaks enemy cohesion and formation tethers within domain radius. He smiled without showing teeth. Scatter, he said, and didn't shout. He didn't need to. The word ran out of him like a dog let off a leash and bit the invisible cords that connected the white robes at wrists and discs. Circles faltered. Lines went sloppy. A man who had held a posture like a promise stumbled and lost the note he'd been humming. Hinata moved then, precise lines in a messy room. She slipped left and struck 2 palms, fast, into a disc's edge. The glow shivered, then collapsed like a bubble popped with a needle. The man behind it gasped and tried to say kneel and instead whispered help like a person who had been told to set fire to things and suddenly saw a kitchen. The one on the ridge with the spear was different. He didn't like walls. He liked lines that ran forever. He wore the disc like an insult and held in his right hand a lance made of sunlight that he spun once, neat, and then threw. Naruto didn't think. You don't think about spears that run straight. You tell your body a story where you were already out of the way. He shadow swapped with Shiba and appeared astride to the right, heat cutting the air where his throat had been. The spear hit the stone and went through it like a law finds a loophole. Chi came out the other side a thinner bar and kept going. A rock pillar fell in half with a sigh, like it had been ready to retire. Hate that guy, Naruto said, and Temari laughed like wind through wires. Lancer, she said, and then called. Down. The second spear came lower. Temari's fan cut its path and split it into 2 angled lines. They sheared past, leaving a taste of iron on tongues they didn't touch. Naruto saw the path to the scribe then, the desert version of the man he'd taken on the road. This one had more letters on him, like he wore calligraphy the way shinobi wore scars. He wrought E in the air with both hands and lines draped across the canyon like clotheslines in a town that believed in neatness as morality. Hinata, Naruto said, 2 steps, then break the wrist, she said, too calm to be anything but accurate. He moved before he decided to. Gaara went low under the web. Shiba took a hook meant to sweep Naruto's knees and made it vanish. Naruto stepped on Shiba's back like a runner using a friend's cupped hands to vault a wall. He went up, higher than a human jump should carry, because the edge of his domain flexed and gave him the kind of help a loyal rune does when you run through it. He came down on the scribe with his blade sideways, not to kill outright but to remove options. He hit the forearm that wrote faster, felt bone crack like dry bamboo, and enjoyed it less than he wanted to. The scribe hissed and switched hands, impressive and doomed. He had a word half written when Hinata's call brushed Naruto's ear. Now, she said. Naruto shadow swapped in midair with Gaara. The scorpion hound appeared over the scribe's head like an extremely impolite idea. It came down, legs a black cage. The scribe tried to step back and hit nothing because Naruto had Desi. Dead to be in the pace where a person would normally retreat to. He slid his blade along the man's ribs and turned the angle at the last second so the cut took the loin of his robe and the light-strapped disc instead of lung. Confession time, Naruto said, because this was a church, apparently. You write well. You read people badly. He punched him. Then he did it again because a bad reader often needs repetition. The scribe's head hit stone and lulled. Naruto's hand went to his chest of its own accord, not because he was becoming the kind of person who harvested people but because he was becoming the kind of person who refused to waste the dead on men who wrote laws with light. The bell rang in him like a coin rolling to a stop. Shadow extraction available. Target. Desert scribe. Conditions. Darkness, sufficient. Will clash. Resolved. Fast. Temari called. Pretty boy is drawing a third spear. Naruto pulled. This shadow came up thin and sharp. It didn't shape into a man so much as into a blade that knew letters. The darkness around it gathered in characters he couldn't read, then collapsed into a single edge that hummed with the memory of being part of commandments. It wasn't a person. It was a tool that had decided it liked being spoken to. What do you call a knife that argues with grammar? Temari asked, dropping beside him and swiping a fresh sheet of dust into the air so thick it made the world cough. Word knife, Naruto said, because sometimes names don't need time. The blade tilted like a nod. Lines of light tried to write themselves across its edge and died. Hinata took a step that looked like nothing and ended with her behind the second anchor. She struck 2 points on a disc's rim and then one under the ear of the man wearing it, and the light went out. And the way streetlights do when it's time for the stars to try. The Lancer saw the anchor go and smiled. People who love lines get excited when you remove boundaries. They think it makes them the only ones who can draw. He threw the third spear, and this one turned in the air like a fish learning what rivers do. It found Naruto in the middle of 5 choices he hadn't had time to make. Trade, Naruto said. He didn't have to specify with who. Shiba moved, Gaara moved, the world flickered, and Naruto was suddenly a yard to the left, spear slashing through where he had been, coming in too close to kill but close enough to scare. He hated when fear made you clumsy, so he stopped being scared and got mean. Tamari, he called. On your right, big one. She grinned. Her third cut was not a wall or a scalpel. It was a collapse. She swung the fan and the dune behind the Lancer decided to move. Sand is patient until it isn't. It came down in a golden curtain, and the Lancer did the neat thing his feet that people do when they realize the ground likes them less than it did a breath ago. He leapt. Naruto leapt with him and discovered that not all laws belong to the purifiers. Gravity is a rule too. He caught the Lancer's wrist in the split second where his arm had to be a lever and twisted. The spear jerked. The line shredded. The Lancer laughed, delighted even in failure, and drove his head forward into Naruto's nose. Pain sang. Naruto's eyes watered. He smiled through it because some engagements deserve dignity and some deserve grins. Bad plan, he told the Lancer, and brought the word knife up and over. Cutting not the man but the light between him and his disc. The connection sliced with a sound like silk torn by a thought. The spear guttered. Hinata, he said. Left foot, she said, reading a movement before it happened, and Naruto hooked his ankle around the Lancers and took him down into the sand where men with long weapons go to die. It should have ended there. The Lancer made it difficult because that is what good enemies do. He reached with his free hand and slapped a sunbrand to his own chest. It flared like a second heart. He looked up at Naruto with the clear eyes of a man who knows he's done something irreversible and regrets nothing but the lack of audience. Almost awake, he said, and laughed. The brand ignited. Naruto tried to wrench his hand away because things that glow on people's hearts usually want to make problems out of your fingers. He didn't make it. Light crawled up his wrist like handwriting set on fire. The Lancer's pupils blew wide and he died laughing. The sort of laugh that is not about humor at all but about the unmistakable relief of fulfilling a story you sold yourself. The light didn't stop. It rose, thin, into the width of a throat and drew itself into a shape at the top. Flat, calm, a face composed of sun and law. It looked like a man who had never rushed and never missed. Asahi, Tamari breathed, wind licking the name away like a secret you shouldn't say out loud in a temple. The face turned. The sensation wasn't sight, it was being examined by a set of criteria your mother would not have approved of. Naruto stood because kneeling was not in the menu and because he was too tired to make new gestures. He kept the word knife low and his weight on the ball of his foot. The pillar hummed, and Asahi's voice slid through the light. Konoha's Dusk King, he said, as if trying the phrase for fit. You're early. Naruto couldn't help it. You're late. A pause that felt like stable floors and careful breakfasts. We will speak, Asahi said. It will be easier if you come. Where? Naruto asked, and then wanted to bite his tongue because negotiations 101. Don't ask where, make them ask you when. Asahi's eyes did not crinkle, but the light around the shape made the flaw where a smile would have been. The pillar lowered like a finger pointing. Heat burned a clean symbol into the sand at Naruto's feet, a map. Spare, beautiful. 3 references and a dot that meant above, not beside. The glass around it cracked like thin ice. Soon, Asahi said, and the pillar drew back into the brand on dead man's chest and went out so cleanly the world felt rude for still being present. Naruto looked at the map burned into sand and filed it where he kept impossible tasks and recipes. He didn't have time to dwell. The choir, now a quartet, panicked. Without anchors and without their spear, they tried to turn light into walls again. Tamari cut the last of the lattice. Hinata ran a line that wool. D. Make a calligrapher weep and hit 2 tenketsu like she was stitching and the man she struck crumpled into sleep without deciding to. Naruto caught his breath and found he'd misplaced it. He let the domain fall. The air did the heavy breath thing runes do when a performance ends. Gaara scraped one leg and then another and came to his heel like a beast that liked orders for their clarity, not their comfort. Shiba unfolded where Naruto stood and took shape only because Naruto had the thought do. Casualties? He asked, not because he feared the answer but because you always ask it first. It keeps your priorities clean. None of ours, Hinata said, already checking wrists and pulses, already pulling a man's head into the shade of a rock outcrop like mercy was the same as professionalism. One of theirs is beyond help. She nodded at the Lancer, whose brand had burned down to a pale scar that looked like an apology in bad taste. We'll take 2 alive, Tamari said. Baki will want to look at their lines. He has curiosities. Tell him not to try to wear any, Naruto said, and Temari's mouth did something pleased. The Suna scouts moved in with rope and water. A driver sobbed once, loud and ugly, and then hiccuped himself into a laugh that had survival stitched into it, crooked but durable. Naruto wiped blood from under his nose and found it had dried into a line that would look roguish if he were someone else. He didn't bother to clean it. He turned the word knife in his hand, curious. Text flickered along its edge. He couldn't read it. He didn't need to. He held it out. Here, he aided to Hinata. She took it like a surgeon accepts an instrument, knowing exactly what she wanted to try with it. She drew the edge along a thin bright line still clinging to a broken disc. The light split and died. She nodded, thoughtful. It listens to tone, she said. We'll need Shion later, he said, because his head couldn't hold another priestess and also because he liked the way Hinata said we and he was selfish enough to enjoy it. They moved the caravans. The outpost took in shaken people and handed them tea and bread and arguments about politics that made sense to people who believed strongly in flags. Naruto sat on a crate with his back against a sun-warmed wall and let the ache in his arms settle. Tamari leaned next to him, fanning lazily, as if she were also sighing. You make dusk like it's a muscle, she said. Not quite a question. It is if you use it enough, he said. I can throw a wall for you whenever you need it, she said. I don't like the way those discs bite. I like the way your darkness makes them choke. He turned his head. That a tactical endorsement? That a flirt? She said, deadpan. When his face did something caught between a grin and a surprise, she laughed. Tactical flirt, she amended, generous. He liked her. He liked that she didn't make the world smaller even when she named it. We need to keep these crossings at dusk, he said, until the choir learns new notes. They won't, she said with the confidence of a woman who had watched men pray to schedules. They'll double down on noon until it kills them or teaches them a language that makes room for other times of day. Quote, maybe we'll teach, he said. Maybe we'll bury, Tamari returned, practical. Hinata came over with a water skin. I marked the path, she said. There's a low wadi we can use if they try to push a sun array through tomorrow. The walls will take wind well. Tamari nodded. You think in maps, she said. It wasn't praise. It was kinship. I like it. Thank you, Hinata said. And there was a crease at the corner of her eye that meant she was amused without surrendering the calm. She handed Naruto the water. Her fingers brushed his. He watched her pret. And she hadn't done it on purpose and knew she had. What did Asahi want? She asked then, because she never let warmth steal time from truth. Me, Naruto said, because lying to her tasted worse than sand in your teeth. Up there. He gestured at the piece of sky where the map's coordinates lived. He called it soon. I'm guessing his soon and mine will have to compromise. Tamari made a face that would have looked unflattering on anyone else. On her it looked like strategy. He'll want you alone. He said that later, Naruto said, and let his head bump the wall. I don't do alone anymore. Good, Hinata said, simple as a glass of water placed by a bed. They left at sundown again, because you don't break a good rhythm just because the day wants you to. Shiba ranged ahead, a shadow that ate even Suna's veteran scouts uneasy until they made themselves watch it walk and realized it was a soldier, not a monster. Gaara ran the dune tops and left no marks, which made a scout laugh once, a raw sound. I like him, the man said. He's like my wife. Naruto didn't have the energy to explain why that was both an odd compliment and perfect. Yugao met them at the Suna gate. She had made it air before them because Anbu have rules about distance that look like magic to people who haven't counted rooftops their whole lives. She took in the scene at a glance, the tired eyes, the two white robes bound and silenced. The way Naruto's steps fell a fraction heavier than morning. Report, she asked, clipped, and then softer. Are you hurt? Nose, Naruto said. Pride, a little. Don't fix the first, she said. The second should hurt. She listened to the rest with her blade still strapped and her weight on both feet. When Naruto got to Asahi, her mouth thinned. So the light has a face, she said. Good. It's harder to swing at principles. Tamari led them into a room where the table was covered in maps and Sand had agreed to stay off the edges as a sign of respect. Baki stood at T. He had like a teacher who expects the class to do well if only because he's very disappointed when they don't. He heard. He asked 2 questions that mattered, and he didn't try to touch the discs like a child. Naruto liked him immediately. We will cross at dusk until this choir ends its season, Baki said. We will not kneel in our streets. No one should, Naruto said, and Baki gave him a look that said, son. We have a library of shoulds and the world has one of wills. They ate bread that tasted of cumin and salt, and Naruto sat under a slatted roof where wind made stripes on the floor. He let his head tilt back and listened to Suna's night. It was quieter than Konoha's, and louder inside the quiet, the way cities made of sand and wool are. Hinata sat across from him and watched stars through slats. You're thinking, she said. Dangerous habit, he said. I'm thinking. I can't pull like that every time. It takes something. He touched the place above his heart where Shiba's attention sat when he wasn't shaped. It wasn't weight, it was potential, like a held breath. Hinata's eyes tracked a star. Then we won't, she said, as if he'd told her they'd run out of tea. We'll change the conditions so we don't have to. Tamari can make dusk. I can break discs with touch. Yugao can cut where rules think they are safe. You use us. Don't be at all. He met her gaze and let the gratitude show. Yes, ma'am, he said. Tamari drifted in and leaned her shoulder on the post beside him as if she'd always leaned on posts he sat under. We leave at dawn, she said. Not because I enjoy dawn. Because the caravan master stopped looking scared and started looking proud, and I'm not letting him mess up my plan. Naruto huffed a laugh. Bossy. Competent, she corrected. You like it. Unfortunately, he said. Fortunately, Hinata said quietly. They slept in shifts. Naruto took the middle and dreamed of glass teeth and bells underwater. He woke with the taste of iron in his mouth. The certainty that Asahi's map had not been carved for someone who learned slowly. He stood before the sun, made sense of the horizon and rolled his shoulders until the ache went orderly. The second crossing went smoother because patterns do when you teach them manners. The purifiers tried to write lines with fewer hands and Naruto broke them with fewer words. They left 3 alive this time. Aw's mercy was a better political instrument at the moment than spectacle. Tamari stamped a seal into a post at the canyon edge that read in Suna's version of sarcasm, noon closed for repairs. Naruto laughed hard enough to crack the morning. By the 3rd dusk run the canyon remembered them the way rooms remember laughter. The outpost cook called Naruto the boy who makes shade and tried to feed him twice as bread. Naruto let him because refusing food is rude whether you're a king of anything or not. Shiba stood watch at the corner of the room where the light forgot to check and Gara raked its legs through a patch of sand as if dreaming of someone else's hunt. At the end of the week Naruto walked the ridge with Tamari under a sky that was too clean to be honest and pointed at a distant smudge. He's there, he said. He didn't know how he knew. He did. Tamari started to say don't and then didn't. We go together, she said instead. He asked me alone, Naruto said. Good for him, Tamari said. I asked for a village. I got one in pieces. I'm not making a habit of letting men talk my allies into bad decisions with their eyebrows. He wanted to say yes because it was the right answer and also the easy one. He looked at the SMDGE again and felt the bell, a polite tone, insistent without being loud. Quest. Approach the coordinates revealed by the Dawn Warden. Warning. Domain will be contested. Reward. He hated question marks more than he hated sun. Together, he said. Hinata's pale eyes met his when he came down off the ridge. She didn't ask. She didn't have to. The way she tightened the strap on her pouch said enough. Yugao sharpened her sword with slow strokes that didn't flash, they absorbed light. She didn't say I'll watch your back. She preferred to do the thing and let language catch up. They broke camp when the sky was the color of soft fruit. They moved lean. No wagons. No excuses. Just wind and a straight horizon and the idea of a man who thought he cool. Write commandments into other people's bones. Naruto stepped off the edge of Suna's world and felt his domain stir like a dog under a table smelling someone carving meat. He didn't feed it. He gave it a place to sit and told it to wait. He didn't look back at the outpost or the canyon or the road where kneeling had been demanded and refused. He looked forward because if you start measuring your footsteps by ghosts you'll make a poor map. On the last rise before the smudge became a ruin, Tamari slowed. You sure about this? She asked. No, he said, refreshingly honest. Good, she said. CERTAINTY is for people who die in neat lines. Hinata's fingers brushed his for a half second and then were gone. Yugao lifted her sword an inch and set it down as if agreeing on a rhythm in a song everyone knew without pretending they did. Naruto smiled, not loud. Let's go annoy a seraph, he said, and went first, because kings of anything worth having go first only when they don't expect anyone else to follow out of obligation. He went because he had people behind him who would follow for their own reasons and because the desert had taught him that sometimes the only way out of a law is to write your own. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Bells from the Abyss. The ruin Asahi had burned into the sand wasn't a ruin at all. Up close, the smudge turned into terraces swallowed by mist, rice paddies climbing a hill like green steps. And an old bell tower shouldering through fog with the quiet authority of a mountain. The land of demons didn't look like the desert or like Konoha, it looked like a SHR. Someone had kept sweeping even after the war forgot its name. Wind came colder off the paddies. The air tasted like wet iron and altar smoke. Priestess country, Tamari said, voice low out of respect she'd never admit was respect. They do ghosts, not politics. They do both, Yugao said, because Anbu keep ledgers in their heads of who owes what to whom. She stood at the edge of the road with rain slipping off the rim of her mask and didn't bother to shake it. Hinata's eyes had the warm, washed clarity she got in rain. She looked up at the bell tower and did not smile, but her mouth softened like rain on paper. There are seals woven into the stone, she said. Not to keep things out. To keep songs in. Naruto tasted that distant bell he'd been hearing in odd rooms and shadowed doors. It wasn't imagination. It was geography. The map Asahi had burned under his feet had been coordinates and a dare. It pointed here because if you want to pull a fight out of someone like Naruto, you ask him to come to people who ring bells to keep monsters out. A line of white cloaks cut across the terraces like the seam in a wound. Purifiers. They moved at a pace that disrespected rain and gravity and serfs. A child ran up the path with mud on his legs and a bell cord in his fist and almost slammed into Naruto's leg. You can't go up, the boy said, frantic. She said stay below, but the men with discs. They won't. Please, breathe, Naruto told him, gentle, an old line made new. He stepped around the boy and up into wet that made his hair heavy and his lashes carry small chandeliers. The bell tower climbed steady above him, and the purifiers fanned, 7 again, because arithmetic is a comfort. The man in front was not the leader. The leader wasn't there yet. The man in front wore a plate of light over his chest like a mirror for other people's fear. He raised a hand and drew a word in the rain with 2 fingers. It hung there in sun script and refused to be washed away. The bell tower answered. It didn't ring like a drama. It rang like somebody flicked a crystal with a fingernail. The sound was small and arrogant. It threaded Naruto's bones with a tone that said I've been here longer than your words. He tasted it in his molars. The purifier flinched, not much, not enough to be called flinching. The word he'd drawn wavered, then steadied. Shion, Hinata said under her breath, satisfied. The first bell strike wasn't for them. It was for the men with discs who liked to write on other people's ribs. Naruto didn't smile, but his heart stood up straighter. They limped to the temple's stone courtyard just as a second bell pealed and the fog around the tower curdled. The place did not look like the kind of holy site people go to on festival days. It looked the kind of diagram an old priest draws when he wants to remember why the first lot built anything at all. Stone in concentric circles, bells hung inside bells, shrine doors carved with lines instead of gods. In the doorway stood a girl, or a woman if you counted how much she had outlived, white robe of a cut different from Purifier's, hair like ink that had dared rain to smudge it. Her gaze found Naruto and hinged there like a lock clicking into place. "Uzumaki Naruto," she said, as if greeting and accusation were the same syllables. "You brought the night with you." "It was bored," Naruto said. She almost laughed. It was not an indulgent almost. It was an assessment. She looked at Hinata and Tamari and the woman with the sword who didn't use her name today and nodded as if she were satisfied with the math. "I'm Shion," she said. "I've rung these bells since I was old enough to reach the lower chord. The men downstairs want to retune us." "Yeah," Naruto said, studying the Purifier's fan. "Ning to make a corridor of commandment lines between terraces. They're real into arrangements." "Good," Shion said, as if he had answered a question he hadn't heard. "I'm tired of people who think being clean means never touching anything." Quote, the temple auditor stepped between white cloaks like a headline between rumors. His robe was plain, not ornate like the scribes. The light didn't rend the raw in around him and his disc sat on his back as if ashamed to be obvious. He had a pen, but it was tucked away, as if he trusted his mouth more than his hands. His eyes read the courtyard and then read Naruto's face. He wasn't angry. He was tired the way men look when they believe they are the only ones doing any real work. "You have a violation," he said. The voice was even, the kind that didn't neigh. Loudness to get children to sit still. He lifted his hand and wrote 2 strokes in the air. The rain avoided them. "You will kneel." The word skated across the space and cut at joints. Naruto felt it try his knees like a craftsman testing hinges. It wasn't brute force. It was suggestion in the voice of a mother he'd never had. "Don't shame us." For a heartbeat, his body wanted to oblige. The bell above them struck once and the tone slid through bone and made the word in the air stutter. The auditor frowned, infinitesimally. "You will kneel," he repeated, as if clarifying messily written minutes. Naruto didn't talk to him. He talked to his shadow the way you talk to your hand when you want it to stop shaking. He put his heel down in a patch of rain that didn't want to be rain because the BL had made it think about being a river. He put his other foot next to it and felt a line of refusal run from his ankles to the back of his skull. The system obliged with a prompt like a card slid a cross-addable by a dealer who knows your tells. Status abnormality. Compulsion, kneel. Countermeasure. Command available. 1. Sometimes you don't pick words, the room picks them for you. Naruto looked at the children pressed back under the shrine eaves, at these bells and their faithful ringers, and at the way Hinata's jaw had set like a far horizon, and said the one thing he had been saying since the road started asking for joints. Stand. The word didn't explode. It settled. It passed out of him like an old carpenter laying a beam across 2 uprights and stepping back to see if the line held. The men with discs staggered, because their knees had met a contrary geometry and lost. The auditor's eyes narrowed to something like interest and then to something like anger, the sort that makes men softer in the mouth and harder in the hands. "An interesting trick," he said. "Do you teach children to disobey? Or do you only model it?" "We teach children to breathe," Naruto said. He felt the command leave him like a warm coin and didn't go reaching for more because he could taste the cost. The auditor drew in the air with 2 fingers. Not the word again. That would have been inelegant. He wrote a different sentence and the skin across Naruto's collarbone tightened, not burning but asserting. The letters didn't just hang. They tried to write themselves into him. "Confess," the man said gently. "Speak the first sin you recall." The bell did not help this time. The bell waited. Hinata moved, not fast, precisely. She stepped into Naruto's space and set 2 fingers on the glowing stroke. At his shoulder and pressed through light with the steady insistence of someone closing a drawer a child keeps leaving open. The stroke bent. Naruto inhaled like he'd been underwater. Temari's fan S. napped half a span open and wind punched the rain sideways, making a blank in the air where letters had been careful. Not bad, Shion said to no one and to Hinata and to Wind and to Bells and to a boy with 6 shadows in his footsteps. She raised one hand to the cord without looking. You can't outlaw them, Uzumaki. They brought a set full of lines. We brought circles. I like circles, Naruto said. Less corners to trip on. The auditor didn't write the next word with his hand. He wrote it with his mouth, and it wasn't a word so much as a tone that forced breath into a narrower shape. Silence, he said, and the air compressed. The bells quivered. Rain stood up on stone like fur on a cat. Naruto's throat tried to close. Hinata's eyes flashed pale and a vein traced at the edge of her jaw. Temari's fan stalled mid-arc, arrested by air that wouldn't move even when asked nicely by wind. Naruto felt the system tilt again like a waiter making a suggestion he thinks you'll like. New command possible. Hush. Description. Nullify active seals, sound-born laws within the domain for a brief window. Cost. Domain integrity. You always ask me when I'm tired, Naruto told the little voice that wasn't a voice, and then to the courtyard and Bells and the man who wanted the world to stop saying things he disagreed with, he said, hush. It wasn't a shout, it was a palm over a mouth that had been yelling for attention all morning. The temple heard him. The bells heard him. More importantly, the space between the auditor's word and Naruto's throat heard him. The clenched air loosened. The sound died without falling. The letters trying to etch themselves into collarbones smeared like chalk in rain. Elegant, the auditor said, and there was genuine appreciation in it, which Naruto resented because it meant this man would have been interesting under other circumstances. Efficient, but not enough. He gestured, not to Naruto, not to the bells, but toward the lower chambers, as if conducting a piece of music the top floor couldn't hear. From below came a noise that wasn't law or song. It was the hum of chakra pushed through the wrong instrument. A tone that would have been bow tiffle if not for the way it kept grabbing at edges and tearing them. Hinata's head snapped toward the stair. There's a seal array under the sanctum, she said, eyes widening in a way Naruto rarely saw. And a sensor. Living. They're using. He didn't let her finish. He couldn't. The thought ran ahead of her tone and landed in his chest with the precision of a thrown needle. Karen, he said, and the name wasn't tidy. It came out like a rip. Temari swore with sand efficiency. Yugao's hand checked the angle of her blade and made nothing else move, as if all the motion had condensed into strategy. Shion's eyes cut between Naruto and the stairwell and the auditor who still hadn't taken his encouragement to leave. Something like sympathy crossed her face and then vanished because there wasn't time to host feelings. They stuck a red thread into our sanctum, she said. They're trying to pull the bell polyphony through a living anchor to tune it to their law. If they do, the valley will be a sun for a day. It will bleach farmers' mouths. It will boil fish in patties. You can stop the choir above or you can save your friend below, she said, choosing the word with care, like a surgeon choosing a scalpel instead of a saw. I have 2 hands. I can wring long enough to hold the roof. You choose. Naruto didn't reach for options in his head. He reached for the part of him that had learned. That choices done fast hurt less later because you didn't waste blood on regret. He didn't like stepping into someone else's moral diagram. He did it anyway if it put his people out of harm's reach and his enemies into work. He turned to Shiba and Gaara and the shadow blade flickering at his hip like an indecorous punctuation mark. Army with me, he said, and felt the phrase fit the room like a familiar jacket fits a winter. Temple holds. Hinata. I'll stand with Shion, Hinata said, before he made it a polite suggestion, because she knew where she mattered. She took the word knife from his hand without ceremony. This listens to tone. That bell cord will need an edge. Temari spun the fan and rain fled their immediate space. I'll skin their laws off the roof, she said. I'll make DUSK in a place that thinks it can't have any. Yugao touched Naruto's shoulder, one light, unworried tap. You break chains, she said, and for once she meant literal chains as much as metaphorical. I'll reassign throats to sleeping. The auditor stepped, weary patience gone. Enough, he said, and wrote a word with his whole body. Lines flared along the courtyard stones like chalk finding a diog. Ram mapped through a dozen previous arguments. Rule upon rule. The bells swayed like old women trying to decide whether to go get their canes. Shion didn't wait for the rest of Naruto's plan. She put both hands into the dark wood of the bell frame and sang a note that made Rain think hard about whether to be Rain. Her voice wasn't pretty, it was accurate. It hit a frequency that had nothing to do with worship and everything to do with engineering. The bells answered in layers, small, bright, gnats around a lantern, then the tower's great throat clearing itself. Light lines hit the cord and bled from white to pale to dumb. Temari's wind slid into the spaces the song made. Hinata set her foot where the diagram wanted her knee and didn't oblige. She touched 2 points on a stone, then 4 in the air. And the auditor's lines broke like old men's promises. Go, Hinata said without looking at Naruto. We're good. He was already gone. The stair down into the sanctum was narrow and damp, the air close as a collar. Naruto sent Shiba first and Shadow swapped past him at the first turn to ruin any ambush that liked first ranks. He followed the hum of chakra not with senses, it wanted to hide from those, but with temper. His anger ran like a river when it found a map carved for it. He hit the lower chamber and his breath hitched. The room had been clean, once. Now it was full of lines like vines grown wrong. Light wrapped around boulders of carved prayer and through a lattice of bells that lay on their sides as if sleeping had been forced on them. In the center stood a lattice of linked seals and, within that lattice, a girl with hair red as a crisis. Her wrists were bound by chakra bands that kept not just hands but expression still. Her eyes were open and flat and furious in awe. Why that made something in his chest grin and stand taller and also want to kick a wall. Hi, idiot, Karen said hoarsely, but the smile landed even through raw throat. Late. Traffic. Naruto said, W. Hitch is the kind of joke people make when they are trying not to touch someone and hurt them and themselves both. Then he stopped kidding because that was rude to the shape she was in. He stepped into the edge of the ceiling lattice and it bit his shin in light. The system sighed like a shopkeeper who told him 3 times the jar had a price and was now ringing it up anyway. Objective. Break purifier resonance array. Warning. Interference with living anchor will cause backlash. Hint. Bell frequency available topside. Domain of dusk penetration. Risky. Shiba took a step and the lines shivered around him. Not because void breaks everything but because rules hate being asked to parse an absence. Gaara clacked legs and caught a hook of light with his carapace like a pickpocket rolling a watch. Naruto slid a hand inside the lattice and felt every taste he hated. Tin, burned prayer, the sourness of someone else's righteousness. He didn't try to solve it with brute force. That wasn't humility, it was arithmetic. He couldn't match a full array's power head to head without crushing Karen inside it. He inched his hand along a glow strand and found anchor points, not just in stone, but in tone. Upstairs, a bell rang, a small one. Then a second, slightly larger, and the song slipped down the stairs like rain. The lattice trembled because even bad laws are tuned to sound in a temple built for bells. Naruto closed his eyes, reached for the doorway inside him where the domain waited, and pulled it open just enough to let the top of the room tilt. He didn't throw night into the sanctum. He put his hands on the edges and whispered to it. Hold, he said, not the light, the noise. Domain of dusk. Localized. Integrity. 62% right pointing arrow 38%. The hum dampened. The array's sigils lost their shine. Where the tuning fork was supposed to hit, Naruto snuck a hand in and caught it, not with fingers, his fingers would have cooked, but with intent. He imagined the sound bending. He imagined Hinata's voice telling him timing and Shion's hand on a rope and Temari's wind closing doors. Above, the bell cord changed, just a hair, just enough to make the array look up like a man trying to remember a so. Ing he used to love before he started writing laws about which notes people were allowed to sing. You're a mess, Karen rasped. I like it. He could hear her again. The damp below his eyes wasn't rain. You look like 3 bad ideas I had in one summer, he returned. This will pinch. Don't make it cute, she said. Do it, then apologize later. And if you get to bite me, I get to bite you. He laughed, small, and felt strength come back to his fingers because laughter is also a law and it likes to be obeyed. He slid his hand farther into the lattice and felt for the knot someone else had thinking the world could be wrapped neatly. The bell tone sagged on purpose, Shien's choice. Naruto pulled. The node shifted, then unfroze, and gave. The array threw a tantrum. Bands of light writhed. One stripe slammed into Naruto's chest and wrote a quick bright word there to make a point. Kneel. And he hated repeating himself, but he did anyway. Stand, he said, and the band stopped being a calm mond and started being a strip of rain with a glow problem. He pulled again, harder, and the array's intention broke like a branch under weight that had finally gotten arrogant. The lines curled aimless, the knot unwound. The last anchor snapped and Naruto reached with both hands through an opening that had never been intended to regard human arms and caught Karen as she fell like a secret told wrong. The room breathed, then remembered it had been full of people with white discs who had been pretending to be furniture, and 3 of them moved at once. Yugao arrived the way good swords arrive, already doing their work. Not demanding attention for it. She came through the doorway like a slice of night with purpose, her blade drawing a straight line through an argument. One purifier went down without seeing the cut. The second caught the flat to the temple and slept as if merciful gods still existed. The third lunged toward Naruto and the red head in his arms with an item that wasn't a disc or a pen. It was a little box of light that smelled like burned herbs and rules. He had time to think bad before Gaara slid a leg between the man's knees and pushed. The box hit stone and hiccuped and released a sun-bright cough. The room spat back a flare. Shiba stepped into it. The void drank. The light stung. The shadow held. Useful. Karen slurred into Naruto's shoulder. He realized she had her teeth set lightly in his collarbone and might be pulling chakra through the idiot root to stabilize herself. He realized he didn't mind and also that her mouth was cold and her smile hot. We didn't need a puppy. We needed a wall. I have a hound, Naruto said, because propriety is a dead language and he's never been fluent. And a friend who acts like a wall when I'm acting like an idiot. She said, and bit him properly. The sharp, clean bite that meant healing now and the low, humming pull that meant you'll be dizzy in a minute. The drag of chakra burned sweet up his neck, painla. Chi go of him like a fist that realized it would be embarrassing to be seen clinging. He set her on her feet and let her hand anchor in his sleeve while he looked up. Up, he said, and Yugao nodded just once. The auditor had not come down to get his hands dirty. That was not arrogance. It was delegation in a bad cause. The ceiling sang with lines slid by men who believed their law entitled them to good acoustics. Up, Yugao said. She touched Karen's cheek with a 2-fingered accuracy that acknowledged the living beacon without touching the place where hard had become breakable. You good for stairs. Karen made a face as if hit on a sore tooth and then smiled with all the trouble she meant to be. If I fall, I'm taking him with me, she said, jerking her chin at Naruto. Sounds right, Yugao said. And didn't smile but had the air of a woman who occasionally remembers that laughter exists. They climbed. The courtyard was a map of music and broken intent. Rain glittered in dunes in the wind's rips. The bells were doing something that would have made scholars weep and zealots call for tar. Shien stood with both hands on the rope of the mid-bell, hair stuck to her neck, sleeves clinging like second thoughts. Eyes wild and very calm, which is what true steadiness looks like. Hinata's mouth was a straight line of exact mercy. She moved between diagrams as if she were drawing a new one in her head for the room to try on. The word knife sang under her fingers when she cut at a seal. It made a sound like an accord being signed without witnesses. The auditor stared at them and, for a moment, looked like a man at the top of a staircase in his house listening to a party he was not invited to in his own kitchen. It cracked something in his composure. He wrote 3 words at once. Light snagged like netting. The bells hesitated. Shien looked at Naruto the way a captain looks at a swimmer just before a wave taller than buildings arrives. Now, she said, the kind of command that isn't about permission. If you have a gate, open it wide. He knew what she meant, though he hadn't known he did until she said it. He put both hands on the invisible rim of his domain and pushed. He fei. It sink an inch into the courtyard like a saucer into sand. The rain turned to mist within it. Sound became a texture in his mouth. His skin crawled with the memory of the bone door saying kneel and him answering no. Only now it was the room itself asking is this enough and him answering more. Domain of dusk. Bellbound gate, creating anchor. Integrity. 38% right pointing arrow, 27% right pointing arrow, 19%. The bells answered, not loud, right. Xian's hands moved with that precision again. Her voice threaded the air and became not a hymn, not a prayer, something like a metronome for gods. Inside Naruto's domain, Light tried to draw straight lines and found curves insisted. He whispered, hush, and seals muttered themselves into brief, embarrassed silence, and the word knife kissed three of them goodnight on Hinata's cue, and Temari's wind shoved the rest into the sympathy of rain. The auditor wrote faster and with less policy. Obey, he said, and bit the B. Not my church, Naruto answered, and for the first time he let his grin show teeth. He didn't go for the auditor. He went for the men who made the auditor possible. He put Shiba into a bright slit where every law thought it could cut and found out it was wrong. He sent Gaara along wet stone, legs stabbing the joints between intention and application. He pointed with two fingers and the dark moved like a sentence obeying punctuation. Karen stepped into the domain and visibly relaxed. It wasn't the lack of light, it was that the line the purifiers had built inside her body no longer hummed with orders. She rolled her shoulders like a woman setting down a pack after a long violence and grinned with a knife's sincerity. I can see them, she said, sensor eyes lit from behind by grudges. Every strand. Left. Left, left. No, he's pretending to be anchor. Al anchors behind the pillar with the crack. Hinata moved without argument, struck the feint with two polite taps to keep it tabled, then took the real anchor's straw-thin neck of light and broke it. It gave like brittle candy. The choir's grid stuttered. Temari's next wind gust turned it into confetti. The auditor stopped writing. You understand nothing, he said, very quiet. The rain around him softened as if his voice had the right to ask for it. You think you can carry night like a blade and not let it cut your palm? Maybe, Naruto said, or maybe I've been cut enough times I learned how to bandage my own hand. The man lifted his fingers and wrote two more strokes in the air, not Latin, not lovely, but functional like a draft horseshoe. The command bit for real this time, slip. D under bell tone and wind and legality, kneel. Naruto's knees wobbled because his body loved tidy solutions under stress. His chest burned where the script wrote itself over the one the array had left like scar on scar. The bell above struck, and split. The note fractured and came back deeper. Xian's throat made a bad sound and then a strong one, a wrong-sounding note sung on purpose that pulled the command off its axis and left it spinning like a bad toy. Naruto put his hand on the line at his throat and felt it the way a thief feels a knot in the dark. He whispered the only thing left in his pockets. Stand. It went out across the gate and beyond the gate, down the stairs into the sanctum, up the bell ropes into the timbers, into the red thread inside Karen's blood and the blue thread inside Hinata's calm and the steel thread inside Yugao's sword and the wind thread that belonged to Temari and, he suspected, into the boy holding a bell cord in the rain at the gate outside. The room lifted half a finger. The auditor reeled back like a man who has heard his own name without honor. He did something he had not done yet. He peeled his disc off his back and threw it. It came like a flying verdict. Yugao saw it, but Angle is a cruel wielder. She'd be a half-second late. Hinata moved, but she was already locked in three other motions. Xian could not let go of her rope without tearing a song that held the roof. Temari's fan was up and wind spun, but it would slap, not stop. Naruto did not think. He told the domain a lie and asked the room to believe it. He shadow swapped, not with Shiba or Gaara, but with the emptiest place in the gate's rim. For a blink, the world accepted that he had been standing there all along. The disc hit him in the sternum. It felt like a wall decity. To sit inside your body where your ribcage should go. He heard his breath leave like a no. He went backwards and then down, absurdly, exactly, to his knees. He had time to think, I hate irony, and then the bell above him struck itself. The tone that came down was not rain tiny. It was a bell with its throat cut that decided it wasn't done singing. The sound hammered his bones and then cradled them. It held Naruto's skull while he remembered how to stand up. It held the disc like a teacher holding a violent child by the shoulders. Karen hit him with two fingers in the center of his chest so hard the world flashed white and then organized itself. Chakra poured through the point and into his heart with the disagreeable tenderness she liked. He coughed. The disc slid out of his shirt and fell like a flung sermon. Sheba planted a foot on it and it stopped pretending to be light. It turned into rain-wet metal and sulked. He stood. The auditor stared and then, worse, smiled like a man despairing correctly. "You think this makes you free," he said. "You have merely chosen a kinder tyrant." "Good," Naruto said, because he no longer had patience for debates that did not involve people living through the next hour. "Kind is what I can answer for." He moved and didn't stop. He went into the space where commands were being written, not to break the man's arm, though he was tempted, but to take the line from his hand so it couldn't write on the afternoon anymore. Where knife slid back into his fingers because Hinata was already on to the next anchor, she let it go like a colleague passing in a hallway. He brought the black edge up and over and cut between the idea and the execution. The auditor's hand went still. His mouth did not. "You will be prison humbled, Dusk King," he said. "They always are. I've seen prisons," Naruto said. "They hate laughter." He smiled like a sin. The auditor stepped back into a bright circle and it lifted him like an elevator, leaving a few guilty coins on the floor. He looked down at them as the rain parted for him and hid his shame and his certainty. "This temple sings today," he said. "Tomorrow, we will teach it decency." He vanished into cloud th. At was trying to be sky again and not getting away with it. Silence came down. Not hush law forced, but the kind of silence that happens after you've made a sound so exactly right that anything else would be impolite. The bells settled. Shion let go of the rope and dropped to the floor, not because she was overcome with holiness but because her legs did the math on oxygen and balance and staged a quiet rebellion. Hinata was beside her a half-second later, hands on wrist, then shoulder, then still because stillness is an instrument, too. Karen leaned into Naruto as if they were already sharing a joke and would have to explain it to someone eventually. Her teeth were still sharp against his shirt. He could feel a bruise blooming under his collarbone in a version of the disc's shape. He was going to make a story out of it and lie about how much it hurt when it was funny to do so. People came out from under eaves because that's what people do when storms decide to remember how to move on. A child ran across the wet stones and didn't fall. Naruto caught him by the armpits because his hands knew how to help even when his body wanted to sit for 3 hours and think about nothing. That was when Asahi stepped out of the fog. No pillars, no spears, just a man in white who made white look like a confession. He walked without touching the ground and somehow still left WT footprints. He was not beautiful, he was arranged. He looked at a piece of falling roof and lifted one hand and the roof changed its mind about falling. He held it a breath, long enough for a boy to run out from under it, set it down with care, and then turned back to the courtyard as if he had put a cup on a table and were proud of not spilling. Naruto hadn't seen him this close without light to sanctify him. The calm was not serene. It was a wall without windows but not without doors. "I am not your enemy," Asahi said. Tamari made a small noise that would have been a laugh if she were a worse person. "You have an odd way of showing friendship," she said. "It often involves large letters." Asahi ignored her, not out of disdain but out of focus. He looked only at Naruto. "I will end what you are becoming," he said. And the sentence was as precise as a surgeon's cut. Naruto could have said a lot. He could have said that what he was becoming had saved a boy and a bell and a valley. He could have said he didn't need a savior with better penmanship. He didn't say any of it. He was tired of being reactive in other people's churches. "You can try," he said, easy, and not a challenge shouted across a moat. An invitation delivered at a kitchen table with good tea. Asahi studied him like a man recognizing a cousin he wanted to like and couldn't make the math balance on. He looked at Hinata with honest curiosity and at Shion with a respect that made a notch in Naruto's anger because those were the only people to whom he listened. He looked at Karen and his mouth did an odd thing, a small precise frown distaste that was actually worry that elders feel for impudent kids. "Leave her out of your arrays," Naruto said, before the man could shape worry into an argument. "Leave the bells out of your policy. Leave children out of your practice." Quote. Asahi inclined his head as if they were at a meeting about irrigation. "Leave monsters out of your streets," he returned. The word monster didn't carry spit. It carried fatigue. He turned toward the temple doors as if to go and then didn't. He stood very still and Naruto recognized the posture. A man arguing with himself and losing in polite stages. "Thank you," he said. Almost too soft to hear it, and then he stepped back into fog and light claimed him like an old friend on purpose. Rain started again, properly, and the smell of wet stone came up like honesty out of a letter. Shion sat down on the steps because she didn't need to stand to prove any point and because she had rung things that weren't bells today. She wiped her forearm across her mouth without ceremony. "Well," she said, "if men insist on writing big words over my house, I'm going to learn to erase." "Occupational hazard," Tamari said, settling in the eaves and opening the fan ju. Same to make a small breeze under her own nose. "You'll be good at it." Yugao sheathed her sword like punctuation, firm, unshowy. "We'll need to move refugees into the lower halls tonight," she said to S. High on the way soldiers talk to priests when the war's regard for holy places has been proved minimal. "Your people have cots." Shion nodded, no indignation at being asked logistics in her own temple. "More than cots," she said. "We have blankets, and we have tea, and we have women who will set your jaw without asking about your soul." "Bless them," Yugao said, almost meaning it. Karen tugged Naruto's sleeve and had the nerve to look shy with her mouth. "Hi," she said again, more softly. "I knew you'd come. Not because prophecy," she added before Shion could correct her with a look. "Because you're you." "You're welcome," he said, a little helpless in the face of her certainty and his own limits. She examined the bruise under his collarbone with the avidness of a healer and a saboteur. He LTED his head without being asked because trust is a muscle you build by doing, not by saying. Hinata came to stand under the same eave and met Karen's grin with one of her own, measured but warm. The two of them had the instant understanding of women who had already decided not to make a man's choices the center of theirs. Hinata's voice held that dry note Naruto adored. "You bit him." "For medical reasons," Karen said. Hinata returned, and the smile in her eyes proved she was a Hyuga with attention paid. Shion watched all that with a scholar's interest and then cut Naruto a glance with no allowance for his age or heroics. "If that gate you held is real and not an idiom, I can fix it into these bells," she said. "It will strain you. It will strain this place. It will also give this valley a night even when men with discs bring their noon." "Do it," Naruto said, unhesitating, because calls like that were why he had shoulders. The bell above them made a quiet noise, like it had approved the quickness of his answer. They did it in motions that felt like a ritual and also like a team exercise. Shion set the chords and Hinata called the lines the way she called angles in a fight. And Tamari tacked wind to stone and Yugao enforced the edges like a captain closing a perimeter. Naruto opened the domain again to a careful width and let the bells fuse a ring into its rim. It flared, a bright of its own kind, and sank. Bellbound gate established. Effect. Domain anchor persists at this site. Entry stable for allies. Hostile seals attenuated within radius. Integrity drain while active. Manageable. He panted once, not loudly, and Shion's hand, without asking permission, set itself over his heart. It wasn't an intimacy, it was a check for pulse. "Don't go past this," she said, and he nodded. The boy from earlier tugged his sleeve again. Naruto crouched because gravity works different around small solemn creatures. The boy pointed at his own chest where a faint, pale script made an almost brand. "It tried to write on me," he said, as if reporting a schoolyard injustice. "But the bell rang and you said a thing and my knees told me to do the opposite." "Is that allowed?" "Very allowed," Naruto said. "Some rules deserve their opposite." "Will they come back?" the boy asked. "The white men." "Yes," Naruto said, "because anything else would be rude to reality. But so will we, and the bells will keep ringing. And the wind will be silly when we tell it to, and your knees will learn words I like." The boy nodded solemnly and then, done with adult conversations, offered a small plum stolen from somewhere. Naruto took it and bit it and tasted rain and a memory of markets and the acid sting of a life that keeps going even when other people decide to write commandments about your throat. When the valley settled into an evening stubborn enough to push light outside polite hours, when refugees had mats and women with clever hands had brewed tea that smelled like grass and second chances. Naruto climbed to the tower and stood under the big bell. The night had his name on it, not as a king, not as a priest, just as a person who had told it, simply, to stand when told to kneel. She joined him without announcing it, because good people don't need to when they intend to be helpful. She stood not close and not far, the companionable distance at which you can argue or laugh without changing positions. I saw him, she said, meaning Asahi. You're light man. Naruto leaned against a timber. He saved a kid from getting a roof in the face, he said. He's polite. He thinks he's the only adult in a room full of sinners with crayons. People like that are exhausting, Shion said. But I admire good carpentry, even when it's in a house I don't live in. Naruto ate a noise that was acknowledgement and not cynicism. He said he'd end what I'm becoming. What are you becoming? Shion asked, not teasing. Practical, Naruto said, and they both laughed. You're becoming someone who makes rooms. Shion said, implement nested in the observation. Keep doing that. Let priests handle temples and politicians handle courts and men like Asahi handle endings. You hand. Le rooms people can stand in and not kneel. I can do that, he said, and believed it until he didn't, and then remembered he had people who would remind him. On the way down the stairs he passed Car. In going up with a bundle of blankets and a scandalous strut. She bumped his shoulder on purpose. You owe me an apology, she said. For what? He asked, genuinely confused. For being late, she said brightly, and then, lower. So it didn't turn into melodrama, for letting them use me. He stopped, because some words deserve full attention. I didn't let them, he said. They did a bad thing. I'll pay for the part where I wasn't there before. I'll pay by being here after. She studied his face as if measuring what parts of him were bluster. She found enough bone under it to sign off. Good answer, she said, and bit his shoulder in the exact spot again. Medical reasons, she added when Hinata, coming up behind with an armload of scrolls and a tiny, incendiary smile in her eyes, didn't bother to look scandalized. Go sleep, King of Shades. Nada, he started, then stopped because arguing titles with friends is a waste of excellent breath. Good night. He slept under a bell that had learned his name, and the dream that found him wasn't of bone doors or kneeling figures. It was of a courtyard where Rain and Dusk agreed to be polite neighbors and a boy who'd been told to kneel once stood and didn't fall over. In the morning the valley woke to a sun that tried to write itself into people. The bell said no, and the wind giggled, and Naruto rubbed the heel of his hand into the U's under his collarbone and thought of Asahi's face in fog. Soon, the light had said. Soon, Naruto said back, but he meant his own version, a soon with maps and friends and a bell that had decided to be on their side. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Night We Stole the Sun. Konoha woke into a clean morning as if the village had decided to apologize for yesterday. Laundry hung like flags over alleys. Children raced shadows that belonged to roofs and not to nightmares, and Naruto walked the market with Hinata and a paper bag of bean buns while pretending the bruise under his collarbone wasn't shaped like an argument. He hated that this was the kind of calm that breaks like a plate. You're counting rooftops, Hinata said, not looking at him. Only the ones you'll yell at me for jumping, he said. And she made that soft noise she made when she didn't mind being caught caring. They turned the corner onto the avenue that faces the Hokage Tower and the air changed the way rooms do when a door you can't see opens. Pigeons lifted all at once. Somewhere a chime struck noon and then kept striking, and in the second ring a new tone slid in, too pure to be metal, too exact to be wind. Hinata's eyes went pale in a blink. Lines, she said, already moving, already in the shape of her. On the sky, Naruto looked up. It wasn't a cloud, it was handwriting. Concentric circles of light stacked over the village like plates. Edges rimmed in sun script that burned and did not smoke. At the quarters and the eighths, pillars descended, thin, humming, bright. At their bases, white-cloaked figures stood on rooftops. Discs blazing like polite halos at a funeral. The siege choir hadn't come to knock. It had come to retune. Someone screamed. The scream didn't stay. It got hired into other people's throats and multiplied. Move, Naruto said, and the word went where it needed to go. Civilians dropped under awnings. Shopkeepers flipped counters and made shields out of pride. Shinobi appeared the way water collects in hollows. Yugao landed beside them with a sound like punctuation. Owl and boar squads on the east and south, she said without greeting. I'm taking Crane North. Your word on the center. Naruto looked at the tower and then at the map only he could see in his head, the one with shadow routes and wind corridors and the places where the light would think it had the right. I'll make night where the choir needs day, he said. Temari. Wind skipped the street like laughter. Temari dropped onto the roofline with her fan on her shoulder and an expression that made sarcasm look like prayer. Present. Where do you want the sky wrong? Everywhere, Naruto said, then grinned because that wasn't a plan. Start with the quarter marks. Cut their edges. Make the circles wobble. Anata's fingers brushed his sleeve and left steadiness where they touched. I'll coordinate from the tower, she said. Shien's bells will help. She's in the tower, Naruto asked. She beat us, Hinata said, already running. He didn't say be careful. They didn't talk to each other like casualties. The first pillar fired. It wasn't a beam, it was a command shaped like light. A band of brilliance dropped and wrote a line across a block. The line didn't burn wood, but shadow fled it like a dog kicked too many times. People spat blood just from being looked at by it. Naruto moved before the Seikon. D fell and didn't stop moving until his feet were on the eaves and the city was aboard. He pulled the gate's door open inside his chest and the world breathed cool against his ribs. Domain of Dusk. Deploying. Integrity. 100% right pointing arrow 81%. Not enough. Light clawed at it like an argument that had hired a lawyer. He put his hands out and widened the threshold, a gentle wrongness crawling down the street. With him like a tide arriving where the schedule had not put it. Shadows sharpened. The band of light that tried to write on the cobbles of Lantern Row stuttered, then went thin as wire. Hey, he cow, led to a pair of academy kids frozen in the middle of the street. You two want to be my decoys. They stared, bleary with fear. Then the smaller one nodded. Naruto threw them a grin that had made 100 frightened people put one foot in front of the other. Run to the well. When the bright lines chase you, turn left. I'll catch. They ran like an answer. The band followed like a policy. Naruto slid under the well's lip and let the domain pull the light down and snap it like brittle candy. The kids slammed into him and bounced off and laughed the way people laugh when they're surprised to still have a body. Naruto sent them toward a doorway where a woman with flour on her hands was already making the shape of a hug. On the roofline to his right, a cannon coughed. He didn't know what else to call it. A purifier bolted a sun disk into a frame and shoved a rod through the center. The rod spat a ring of light that rolled over shingles and took the color out of everything it passed, a street. Steamroller that had mistaken noon for ethics. Temari, Naruto said. I see it. Wind hit the ring sideways. It tilted, skipped, kissed a chimney, chewed half through a laundry line, and corrected cower. Say toward a cluster of civilians in the square. Hinata's voice came from somewhere above, steady as measurement. Naruto, I've got it. He shadow swapped with Shiba mid-sprint and rose into the ring's path. Hands up like a fool holding a wagon wheel. He didn't stop it. He angled it, hooked it with the curve of his domain's edge and rolled it into the alley that ended in empty crates. It slammed into wood and exploded into a wall of heat. Pain popped in his ribs like knuckles. HP. Minus 14%. Note. You're an idiot. Rude. Naruto told the prompt, breathless. I agree, Karen said, appearing at his side like a bad idea he had chosen on purpose. Her hand was already on his shoulder, teeth followed, a neat press. Energy poured like tea. Her eyes were bright and mean in the way he loved her for. Next time try asking the cannon not to ruin my day. Will do, he said, dizzy and grateful and not making it a joke larger than it needed to be. I need a gate to breathe through. Karen closed her eyes and made a sound in her throat like someone telling a dog to come. The bell-bound gate Naruto had anchored in the land of demons bent across the distance like a trick of echo. In the tower, a bell answered, small, incidental, and the domain steadied. Bell-bound gate. Remote tether established. Integrity drain reduced. Go, she said, shaking off the tug in her legs like a runner before the sprint. I'll hold the door. Don't be noble, be effective. Bossy, he said. Competent, she returned, stealing Temari's word as if she had a license. A pillar tried to write itself down on the academy. Yugao hit its conductor from behind and the man went forward without grace or poetry. She didn't stop. She slid along the parapet like a ghost with training and hit a second throat with the flat. On the next roof, a purifier lieutenant, gold piping at the collar, tragedy written in his shoulders, spun to bring his disc to bear. Yugao cut the strap that kept it on his back. The disc bounced twice and rolled into a chicken coop. The chickens decided the siege was a new form of weather and scolded it. Center choir, Hinata called from the tower. 12 casters, 4 anchors. The array's geometry is, Xian. Arrogant, Xian said, hands on ropes, hair stuck to her neck. She didn't speak the rest, she rang it. The bell's tone ran down the tower like a wire and braided into the domain with a click. Her next note wasn't pretty. It shoved. Good shove, Naruto said, and the prompt slid this time like a friend who had learned when to keep its commentary to itself. Command available. 2. He didn't hedge. Hush. The word clapped over a block and the seals there tried to yell and realized they had been muted. Men on rooftops looked up, mouths open like fish. Temeri's wind took that moment to knife the eastern quarter edge and the circles over the village wobbled enough to make people point and dare to hoot. A woman with a baby at her hip leaned out of a doorway. Is it working? She shouted. Naruto didn't look. He couldn't afford to look where people asked him to answer their day with certainty. Keep your head down, he said, as gently as he could say it and still make her listen. A blast took the side off the mission hall. Fire tried to be relevant. It wasn't, but the smoke was a problem. Naruto landed in the street in time to see a purifier captain raise a hand and aim a line at a man crawling out from under a beam. The line would right kneel across the man's spine and turn him into a lesson he didn't sign up to be. Don't, Naruto said, and flung scatter like a coin. Command. Scatter. The captain's formation broke and the line skittered into a wall and wrote KNE on old plaster that refused to learn new languages. Naruto moved in the stutter. He didn't kill the captain. He took him hard to the ground, twisted his arm, and set his knee between the man's shoulder blades and made him look at the street. You don't get to pick the page people die on, he said. It landed, not as law, as fact. He felt the moment arrive. The geometry above clicked. The choir retuned. A bright ring condensed into a hard coin over the tower and began to drop like a sunrise being turned into a weapon. Hokage. Yugao's voice cut clean across the square even without a radio. We need the roof. Tsunade answered from the steps below the tower, voice flat with a surgeon's calm and a gambler's patience. You see me sitting down. Get it done. Xian pulled the mid-bell down into a note that made teeth ache. Hinata's fingers ran along a railing in front of the balcony like she was reading a braille only she could feel. Naruto, she said, and there was nothing in the tone but trust shaped into direction. 2 degrees west. Pull. Now. He did. The domain bucked like a horse that I didn't like his hands and then accepted them because he wasn't asking for worship, he was asking for partnership. The sky over the plaza went darker, not black, the indigo that belongs to late evenings. When neighbors call to each other and mean it. The coin of light hit it and spread, surface tension gone wrong. Temeri's wind punched up from 3 alleys at once and turned it into a bowl. Karen's tether gave his ribs back to him. Yugao took the corner of the bowl that tried to slip and hammered a man's wrist until the release lever he'd never admit to using clicked. The bowl flipped. It came down as night. Not everywhere. Not forever. A radius of 2 blocks went indigo at noon. The heat softened the way voices do when you talk to a child. Shadows flooded the cobbles like water from a breach. Ed Tenkan stood where Naruto told them to hold, he said, low, because you don't yell at horses when they finally do the trick with their whole heart. Hold. People stopped running because running in the wrong dark feels disrespectful. They looked up and saw a ring of night where the choir's coin had been and they didn't kneel because the idea wasn't in the room. The purifier captain under Naruto's knee stopped being a captain and became a man again. He didn't start crying. He started breathing ugly, which is how brave people cry without losing their stories. Naruto eased his knee and stood. Go, he told the man. Stand somewhere honest. The man scrambled and ran without dignity. That would come later or not at all. Naruto didn't think he owned that outcome. A shout tore the ring. A figure in white at the bowl's rim realized what was happening, realized the choir array was feeding the wrong god, and threw himself at the adjuster node. He grabbed the lever and yanked. "Don't," Naruto said. Too late, and the lever broke. The array hiccuped and reloaded. The bowl wavered. "Hold," Shion said from the tower, not to Naruto but to the bells and the wood and the history of the valley that had made them. The bell note did not get louder, it got wider. It laid itself over the plaza like a hand on a fevered forehead. The bowl steadied. "Shiba," Naruto said. "Front. Gaara. Left. Word knife. Hinata." Hinata didn't say "I have it." She didn't waste breath naming competence. She cut a lattice over the plaza with the shadow blade like she was signing a treaty with a language that had never seen ink. The seals trying to retie the choir's coin snagged and untied. Temeri's wind took the loose ends and made them into ribbon snakes that fled into alleys and got tripped by cats. A cannon misfired. The charge backfired into the frame. Light spat into the street like someone had found a new way to be violent. Naruto didn't make the choice, his body did. He grabbed the nearest pair of civil Ians and the kid between them and hauled them into the indigo. The blast hit the rim. Pain ate his side, neat as a mouth. He almost laughed from the shape of it. His vision patterned for a second and came back as Hinata's voice. "Naruto. Here," he said, because that mattered more than any diagnosis. "I'm here." "2 more anchors," she said, and he could hear what it cost her not to leave the bow. "Koni and come to put hands where he had been hit. If they fall, the choir will collapse." "Temari. East," Naruto said, breathing shallow, graceless. "Yugao. North. I'll take the south." "Right," Yugao said, and disappeared into motion. Finally, Temari said, "Already gone." Karen stepped in front of him and pressed her palm to his ribs like she owned the lease. "Bite?" she asked, eyebrows up, impish. On purpose to make him stop writing a martyr's essay in his head. "Yes," he said, not heroic in any capacity. She bit his shoulder with clean teeth and pulled chakra through the idiot root and the ache receded from red to orange. HP. -7%. Status. Functional. He ran. The south anchor sat above the Aburame compound on a roof stitched with wires and small, neat tiles. The lieutenant guarding it wore a collar with gold piping and a perfect posture that said the man had never eaten dinner standing because chairs were for sinners. He raised his hand and light bristled around his fingers like quills. He didn't speak. He aimed. "Don't," Naruto said again, and this time he arrived with the kind of speed that has nothing to do with legs. He shadow swapped with Gaara at the anchor's base and came up under the lieutenant's arm. He twisted the wrist. Not enough to break, enough to rename, and the light cut wrong and killed a gutter. The lieutenant spun and threw his other hand and Naruto said hush. And the seal binding in the palm said oh and went out like a candle deciding to have a kinder career. They fought the way trained men fight when they have no imagination and it almost works anyway. Naruto didn't win because he was stronger. He won because the domain has an opinion about leverage and he had learned to listen to it. He put the lieutenant on his back and took the strap off his disc and threw the disc into a laundry basket. And for a bewildered second the lieutenant lost rank and became a man in white in someone else's yard who didn't know where to put his hands. "Sleep," Naruto said, and used 2 knuckles the way Yugao had taught him. The man obeyed. It was the first time today obedience had looked good. The anchor went with 3 precise cuts because Hinata had said where to cut earlier, from a balcony, quietly. The ring of night trembled and then settled into something like dignity. People in the plaza under it stood properly. Some of them shouted. One elderly woman PPED a purifier with a sandal and then started scolding him about footwear in a tone that suggested she had known him as a child. Naruto allowed himself the half-smile people call relief when they need it to be contagious. "Last anchor," Hinata said, eyes on a map only she and the bells could see now. "North." "Yugao." "Done," Yugao said. Her voice was not out of breath. "She doesn't get out of breath." Captain attempting to rejoin. "Permission." Tsunade's voice called from the steps, firm, unamused. "Bring me one that talks." On it. The bowl began to shrink on its own, not because the choir had mastered it, but because the domain was a living thing and Karen's tether could only take so much polite abuse. Shion let the bell tone slide into a lower octave that said we're almost through, be good. And Temari turned her wind from knives into hands, setting the last of the wobbling circles down like plates on a high shelf. 5 minutes, Shion called. Then the ring will go whether we like it or not. Make them count, Naruto said. They did. What happened in those 5 minutes is what people would tell each other over noodles for the next 10 years. How a dog dragged a child 3 paces by his sleeve and got a dumpling out of it. How an old genin with one eye opened a trapdoor and pulled 6 strangers into his root cellar and gave them pickles. How a shinobi with a cat mask walked a line almost as straight as the one the choir tried to write, and at the end of it laid a captain face down and took his disc like a trophy she didn't intend to mount. None of those stories would put Naruto at the center of it, and he loved that. The ring thinned, then lifted. Noon returned like a guilty friend, too bright, trying hard not to be obvious. The choir tried to retune and found its anchors gone. Men on rooftops looked at one another with the bleak calculation of professionals whose doctrine had not prepared them for theft. Stand down, Tsunade called, hands on hips, medical coat flapping like a stubborn flag. Or I'll have my assistant write very mean letters about you to your mothers. A pocket of laughter got hired by the crowd. One captain didn't stand down. He stood taller. He had the eyes of a man who had just realized that all his effort, all his prayer, had been turned into someone else's poem. He screamed, not loudly, and grabbed the lever at his station. Don't, Naruto said. He was still halfway across 2 blocks. The captain wrenched hard. The lever snapped. The array above them hiccuped and then tried to empty the remaining charge into the captain's body to make a point about faithfulness. It made a point. The man lit like bad stage fire and fell through it. He hit shingles and slid. Naruto called the domain just that hair wider and caught the light in the act of becoming moral and turned it into heat and into steam and into nothing that would need to be written on a wall later as a cautionary cliché. He reached the captain as the man was trying to angrily and put a hand on his shoulder to slow the speed of his regret. Stop, Naruto said, and because he had a terrible sense of theatrical timing, the prompt slid up his spine. Shadow extraction available. Target. Choir captain. Conditions. Darkness, marginal. Will clash. Hi, I'm tired, Naruto told it, and then, to the man dying under his hand, as honest as he knew how, I don't want to take anything else from you. But I can make sure your bad decisions protect people for once. The captain tried to spit in his face and couldn't find water. Thief, he said. Borrower, Naruto said. He pulled. The shadow didn't rise easy. This wasn't like the scribe, thin and sharp and ready to be turned. This was a block of iron that had been told all its life to hold lines precisely. It's straw. Inden asked him who he thought he was, and when he didn't answer with theory it grudgingly followed because he had people behind him and the domain in front of him, and sometimes the only answer you need to carry is I'm not alone. The shape that came up wasn't a man, not exactly. It was a bulwark, a dark plate shouldered with a hint of sun insignia burned black, a tower shield held by absence, AW line that had chosen to be stubborn even dead. It stood in front of him instinctively, between him and the tower and the place the next bright mistake would come from. Name, Naruto said softly, B. 'Cause this one felt like naming a grave wrong if he got it flippant. He thought of a night at noon in a city that stood. Knocked, he decided. You're knocked. The shadow bowed from the waist, solid, not pretty. Like the first honest yes of a difficult friendship. Useful, Tamari said, landing beside them in a gust that kicked grit up his sleeve. She poked Noct's shield with the end of her fan. G. Avenue with a sound like an opinion not changing. Ugly, but I'll allow it. Compliment accepted, Naruto said, because he was pleased too and refused to make it bigger. On the steps of the tower, Yugao dropped a purifier to his knees. Wrists bound, white collar smudged with honest dirt. She released him with a shove that meant he was a witness, not a prize. He looked out over the plaza at the boards pulled off windows. At the women pouring water into the street, at children arguing like scholars about whether the bowl had been night or a hat. His mouth moved like a man remembering the taste of his own. The choir's geometry broke. The plates in the sky went dull. If people had been a different sort, they would have cheered and started parading paper lanterns. Konoha just got practical. The fire brigade hauled hose. The Aburame swept glass into neat piles. Tsunade stalked the plaza and used her medical eye on anyone who looked like they were pretending to be braver than their body could afford. Hinata came down the tower steps fast, and when she reached Naruto he was still on his feet, but that had a lot to do with the way his stubbornness liked to be theatrical. She didn't scold. She set her hand on his wrist and looked at him with that deliberate attention that resets bones and minds both. Present and accounted, he said. Her mouth flipped at one corner in a way he had only ever seen belong to her. Good, she said. She looked at the bruise under his collarbone that was going to flower into something shinobi admire and civilians wince at. She didn't ask if it hurt. He loved her for that. The plaza's noise thinned the way conversation does when someone interesting chooses a moment to arrive. Light collected on the rim of the crater where the choir's heart had been. It didn't drop like a coin. It condensed like a breath on a mirror. Asahi stepped out of it with the quiet of a man stepping into a garden. He took care of himself. He didn't shine so much as insist. He looked at a woman hauling water and stepped aside without making her notice she had been made way for. People hate it when their enemies are polite. Naruto walked forward because the village doesn't like when important conversations happen off to the side. Noct fell in behind him by reflex. Shiba angled left. Gaara clicked on tile. Someone would yell at him for it later and then give him meat. Hinata kept pace on his right. Temari on his left. Karen behind with an expression that promised she would make the first stupid man into a pincushion, and Yugao a half step back because someone needed to be thinking about which roof would make a good exit. You've proven you can protect, Asahi said. There was no sarcasm. He was not congratulating a child for sweeping the floor correctly. He was making an entry in a ledger he wanted to be accurate. And you've proven you can ruin lunches, Naruto said. It bought him a breath and drew a small, raw laugh from a boy with a plum. Asahi's eyes slid to ring in the sky where night had been and then to the bells on the tower where she leaned against a pillar with a look that said she had just taught herself a degree in an afternoon and would be charging interest. He inclined his head to her. He didn't have to. He did. Come, he said to Naruto, and the word did not have the weight of a command. It had the weight of a man who had learned that requests are for adults. Dawn. Sky above the Temple of 10 Spears. Naruto looked up at the slice of blue that had the gall to be clear. That's not on any of my maps, he said. It is on mine, Asahi said. He didn't smile. His mouth did something that might become one if he ever forgave himself. Wings of light flexed off his shoulders, half-formed, threadbare at the edges, not an ornament, not a miracle. Come alone. The village did a small, collective no. Not out loud, not with a plan, just the feeling of hundreds of bodies making a shape that meant it. Naruto didn't answer the alone with argument. He glanced right and left. Met Hinata's steady, Temari's wicked, Karen's bright, Yugao's narrowed, and then looked back at the man who thought he could write dawn onto other people's throats. I'll be there, he said. I don't do alone anymore. Asahi's face didn't change. The light around him softened, as if grief had good manners. I know, he said, and it was a better compliment than permission. He stepped back into the brightness, and this time the light did not flinch from shadow. It folded him out of the square as politely as a door in a careful house. Naruto exhaled. He did not let his shoulders drop. People were still watching and he believed in theater when it kept people on their feet. He turned, not to the tower or to Tsunade yet, but to the woman who had asked earlier from the doorway if it was working. She was in the plaza now, baby at hip, hair stuck to her forehead, still evaluating whether the day owed her a new swear word. It worked, he said. She snorted. I saw, she said, and pointed a wet finger at the sky. You put a hat on the sun. Temporary measure, he said. Do it again if they try, she said. Then, grudging because Konoha is not sentimental when there's sweeping to do, thank you. He bowed. Not big enough. Tsunade came then, quick steps, a short rope of frustration and pride braided together. She didn't hug. She doesn't in public unless it will win a fight. She looked at him and then at the ring in the sky and the charring on the plaza and the way Hinata was standing and the fan Temari held like a half-closed secret and the bite mark on Naruto's collarbone that Karen had the gall to look proud of. Report, she said. Choir broken, Naruto said. 2 anchors neutralized by us, 2 by friendly wind and a very quiet knife. 1 captain. Didn't make it. We have another who will talk. Civilian injuries but no fatalities in the ring. We stole noon. Tsunade's mouth twitched. Don't write that in your report, she said. I don't want to explain grammar to elders. Understood, he said. Yugao stepped forward with the bound purifier. He saw and did, she said simply. He also listened. Might be infection. Might be conscience. Tease. Unaid nodded to the shackles like a doctor checking sutures. Put him in a room where the light is good and the chair is bad, she said. We'll see if conversation cures zealotry. Xian came down the steps with her bell-raw voice and the kind of steadiness you get when you've told the world to hush and it listened. Your ring will hold weak for an hour, she told Naruto. People can move under it without fear. After that it will lift and be only an idea. You'll need that idea. She tipped her head as if to a king and as if to a boy with wet hair. Not bad, not bad, Temari echoed, then nudged Naruto with her fan. Teach your shield to stand in the right place when I stand in the wrong one. Knocked, Naruto said, pointing. The bulwark moved, a wall with good manners. Hinata stood with him, in the middle of the square as people began the work that comes after surviving. She didn't say rest, he didn't. They let the feel of the village get into their bones, the particular hum of people will sweep and repair and tell each other about bowls and hats and chickens yelling at discs and how the boy with plums did not kneel. He looked at her hand. She looked at his. They did not take them. Because that felt like a scene for a time when the plaza wasn't full of tired people pretending laughter wasn't the same as medicine. But their fingers hovered close enough for the space between to count. Dawn, Hinata said, because she was never going to let a promise go fuzzy just because a village had survived a noon that tried to be two. Dawn, he said back. Above the clouds, Karen Ed herself under his free arm and made a face at the sky. Sky temples are overrated, she said. Not enough places to sit. Plenty of places to fall, Yugao noted, checking her sword for chips like other people check their teeth. Temari's grin went bright and unkind on purpose. Well then, she said. Let's go see if a man who thinks he owns Dawn can tell the difference between a king and a room full of friends. Naruto looked at the ring where Night had been and then at the faces around him, and the bell inside his chest, small, exact, struck once. He didn't bow to it. He nodded, like a carpe. NTER making sure a door would hang straight. Let's go, he said. Bring a coat. I hear it's cold up there. Chapter 4 end. Chapter 5. Two monarchs at dawn. The sky started as a rumor. By the time they reached the ridge beyond the Bell Valley, it had become an argument with physics. Stone plates hung over the clouds like steps carved for a giant with tidy feet. Waterfalls ran in the wrong direction, spilling upward into light and then breaking into mist that rained down on nothing. Temple of 10 Spears, Temari said, bracing a hand on her hip as Wind tried to turn her skirt into a weather report. Whoever built this hated stairs and loved drama. Good carpentry, though, Xian murmured, studying the joints where columns met nothing and still held. She palmed a slim bronze bell she'd packed into her sleeve. If Asahi wants you alone, he can come learn about disappointment. Yugao tugged her mask down to hang at her neck. We move in pairs, she said. No speeches until we can cut our way out of one. Karen bumped Naruto's shoulder with her temple like a cat making a point. If he tries anything with commandments and grammar, I'm writing my own rude words across his face. Hinat stew. D at the edge of the last ledge before the air forgot to be ground and let the Byakugan drink. Pale veins traced, delicate and absolute. 12 platforms, she said softly. 10 pillars arranged in a ring around a central plate. Seals carved into light. The spears aren't stored, they're scripted. Naruto rolled his shoulders and checked the fit of the short blade across his back. The bruise under his collarbone ached like an old promise. Then we bring an eraser, he said, and let the gate inside him crack just enough to taste the sky. Quest. Ascend. Confront the Dawn Warden. Warning. Domain will be contested. Up you go. Dusk King, Temari said, dry and fond at once, and snapped her fan. Wind lifted all of them in a body, not a ragged scatter. Xian's tone braided through it, bell thin and sure, turning the gust into a path. They rose past the lip of cloud and into white. The first platform accepted their weight the way old houses accept grandchildren, wary, indulgent. 5 paces ahead a spear of light hung point down. Taller than a tree, script crawling over its length like ants on sugar. Beyond it, a pillar flared and a word woke, carved through air with the confidence of a sentence that expected to be obeyed. Yield. Not today, Yugao said. The spear fell without falling. Distance turned itself inside out so that the point was at Naruto's throat and the shaft was farther away than the horizon. His body wanted to betray him with the neatness of a knee bending to the syllable. He said the simple thing. Stand. The command left him like heat and hit the word square. The letters wobbled. Yugao stepped through. Blade flat. The spear rang against her steel and bounced a degree aside. Temari's wind scooped it as if she'd been planning for this for days and sent the point. Through a ring of dust she conjured from nowhere, when it came out the other side, the script had smudged. Left platform, Hinata called, fingers drawing angles in the air. Second pillar loading. Burn. On it, Shion said, and struck her bell once. The tone that came out should have been pretty. It wasn't. It undercut the pitch of whatever the pillar thought a room should sound like. The word B. Burn slurred and bled around the edges and then, insulted, shrank. They moved. Platforms shifted in a slow carousel, closing space between them and the center. Every step bought them a new spear with a new intention. Break, bow, confess. Naruto didn't try to outrun them. He put his domain under his boots and walked. The air felt wrong, like noon deciding to sit in your chair. He made room for his kind of wrongness in return. Domain of dusk. Deploying. Integrity. 100% right pointing arrow 83%. The pillars did not like it. Fine. He didn't like them either. Karen anchored a tether through him. No bell this time, Jew. Saint a line of red stubborn chakra that said don't drift. You lose altitude, you're dragging me with you, she warned. Bossy, Temari said from the next plate over, grinning. Competent, Karen shot back, shaking hair out of her eyes. The spear-marked confess swooped for Naruto's collarbone like it had read the scar there and wanted to make it a sermon. Hinata's hand tapped two tenketsu in Naruto's shoulder in a rhythm he knew from corridors and triage, reset. The ache cleared. He stepped in, set both palms on the spear's flat, and pushed. It should have burned. It didn't. Not in here. His domain made the light compromise. Word knife, he called, and the shadow blade slid into his hand like a colleague swapping shifts. He cut the vowel at the heart of confess and watched the word gasp. They reached the second ring without losing anyone. Shiba caught a slant of light that wanted to write bow across Temari's spine and stood there like a fact until the writing ran out of patience. Gaara Skur aped past Hinata's ankle and leapt to another platform like broken glass growing legs just to insult the engineer. Your church has ugly pews, Temari muttered toward the sky. The third ring came at them hard. As if the temple finally took offense at how casual they were about refusing it. 10 pillars lit at once. Spears rose one after another, a round clock's worth of commandments drawing themselves into bone. Asahi stood on the center plate, calm as a man on a porch. He wasn't wearing radiance like a cloak, it hung on him like a set of polite rules he couldn't bring himself to break. Wings of light drifted from his shoulders, edges unraveling, as if Dawn were tired but disciplined. He watched Yugao cut a spear in half. He watched Hinata press 2 fingers to air and make a command seal stop pretending it was a law. He watched Shion turn a bell into a level. Uzumaki, he said. The word crossed the gap without asking the wind's permission. You didn't come alone. Bad habit, Naruto said. He found stable ground at the edge of the center plate because he decided it existed and the day had to live with that. Good results. Asahi didn't roll his eyes, but the light at his shoulder did something that might have been the brightest version of that gesture. Then bring them through, he said. If we are going to end a story, it should not have witnesses at the wrong angle. Cute, Karen muttered, and showed Naruto more teeth than any licensed medical professional should have. The last 2 platforms slid into place. They stood, 5 across, with shadows in their wake, Shiba 2 steps off Naruto's left. Knocked behind with the tower shield of absence at an angle, Gaara twitching its glass legs at the rim. Hinata, Temari, Karen, Yugao, Shion, each held where they belonged, which is a grace you don't learn from law. 10 pillars brightened. The spears rose, points down, ready to drop. Asahi lifted his left hand and the sky held its breath. Yield, he said again, not as a spear, not as light. As a suggestion made by a man who had used suggestions for longer than Naruto had been alive. Naruto exhaled. No, he said, pleasantly. The spears fell. They split. Temari's wind didn't push, it wrote. She carved channels for the spears to slide through and made them argue with each other. Yugao stepped into one midair and met it on the flat, blade singing, the script down its length. TH tried to order her to stop existing and discovered steel that had made its peace with grief. Hinata struck a seal and it folded like paper. She struck another and it crumpled with a sound like a law, realizing it had misread the room. Xian rang a tiny bell in her palm and one of the spears stuttered as if it had tripped over a stair that had not been there a moment ago. Karen stood 5 paces behind Naruto and sucked chakra from his shoulder with delicate, exact pulls, keeping the gate open when it wanted to shrink. The domain passed under their feet like a cat weaving legs. Naruto took 2 spears and turned them. He didn't try to catch the points. He set his hands on their shadows. The light cast a faint dark onto the stone. It shouldn't have been enough. It was everything. He pulled, not with muscle but with the refusal that made him into himself on bad days, and the shadows peeled up with a hiss like rain on a hot roof. Shadow extraction available. Target. Commandment spears, shadows. Conditions. Darkness, marginal. Will clash, medium. They rose thin at first, paper swords. Then thicker, oiled, a darkness that learned. He turned one and threw it at break. The shadow hit its light twin and they chewed each other into nothing with a satisfied noise. Asahi watched that and did not sigh. He folded his hands, polite. You think light doesn't know it makes shadows, he said. I think men forget to look down when they're busy writing on ceilings, Naruto returned, and the grin he let show wasn't cruel. It was delighted at how alive he felt when he was right here, between disaster and a joke. Asahi lifted his right hand. 10 pillars answered. The air above the plate filled with little laws, stop and burn and bow and yield, reduced to punctuation, repeated into chiography. He stepped into them, and they stuck to him like rules stick to saints. His wings flared. The floor wrote light under his bare feet. He moved fast without hurrying. Naruto moved. He didn't shadow swap to run away. He traded places with Noct to walk forward through a rain of spear shadow and laid his palm on the rim of Asahi's light like a carpenter measuring a slight bend in a beam and deciding. G to plane it not for symmetry but for function. Shiba, he said, guard Temari's right. Gara, bite the third from left pillar. Word knife. Hinata. Commands left him like breath. The fight stopped, being a set of reactions and became a room he was responsible for. He pulled the gate wider until it fit the circle of pillars and the sky went a soft, indigo wrong. Asahi's shoulders tightened for the first time. Domain of dusk. Extended. Integrity. 83% right pointing arrow 49%. Don't overreach, Karen warned, voice low and fierce. I can keep you upright or useful, not both. I'll take useful, he said, and meant it. Asahi came in then. No trumpet. No ostentation. He walked at Naruto and, when they were 2 paces apart, all the light in his hands explained itself as a spear of commandments, small and exact. Naruto raised a shadow twin to meet it. They hit. The first exchange wasn't elegant. It was messy and honest. Light scraped dark. Dark chewed light. Each time the edges met, a word tried to imprint on skin. Yield, break, confess. Naruto said stand so often it stopped being a word and became the tone of his breathing. Asahi moved with accuracy so refined it felt like kindness turned violent. Naru, to moved like a room rearranging itself so people could fit. Tell me what you'll be, Asahi said between sparks. Not a taunt, a request for a definition to write into a ledger and hand to the next person. A man who builds rooms, Naruto said. He hooked the shadow spear under Asahi's and levered. With windows. Windows let fire in, Asahi returned, turning the blade and nicking Naruto's cheek eye. A neat line that would read as arrogance if Naruto told the story wrong later. Also air, Naruto said, stepping past a strike that wanted to make a lesson out of him. Spears rained, wind wrote, bells bent note, Hinata's voice cut across the plate. Not at Naruto, not as correction, but as cadence. Angle. Now, he turned a half inch and felt a spear of burn slide by his ear instead of entering it. Yugao bled along a line of commandments and came out clean because she would not let them write on her. Tamari laughed breathless and made a gust behave like a hinge. Xian let the small bell drop to her palm and rang the tower in her throat. The tone that came made the pillars flicker. Karen bit harder and chakra burned into Naruto's back like a brand he decided to read as loyalty. Asahi lifted his left hand and the pillars. Script shivered into something new, no single word, a string. Naruto felt his knees tense independent of him. It wasn't kneel. It was the long cousin of that word, yield y. Our future to me, and it was beautiful and lethal in the way lullabies are when sung on battlefields. Hush, Naruto said, not loud. He spread his hand and laid it on the string and pulled the sound due WN out of the air and put it on the floor like a coil of rope. The string went quiet. It was still there. It was just not in charge for a breath. Asahi's mouth tilted, a fraction, approval without surrender. You will make a kind tyrant, he said. He meant it as both praise and accusation. Naruto didn't answer with rhetoric. He answered with a choice. He looked past Asahi to the pillars and the wall. Why they threw shadows in his domain and decided he didn't need to break them. He needed to hire them. He put his palm to the stone and pulled, not the light, not the commandment. The shape they cast. Shadows came up, one for each spear. Thin at first, then thick. They didn't become men. They became beams. He turned them without making them ugly and slotted them together into a cage, open at the top, doors everywhere, not a prison. Something like a trellis for vines to grow through if vines were plants. Shadow extraction. 10 spear shadows bound. New structure. Dusk lattice. Effect. Redirects active commandments within radius. The next volley of law hit the lattice and turned. Break struck a beam and bent into BR, then died because language hates being interrupted. Bow tried, met a crossbar, and became bow, which is a stick. Confess ran along a rib and came back to Asahi as Khan, which told on itself. Asahi looked up. It was the first time he had to move on Naruto's terms. Clever, he said, and took a step that was not retreat so much as a refusal to be pushed. He raised his hands. The light behind him gathered into wings that, for a breath, were not tired. He grew brighter, and brightness burned the edges of Naruto's domain. The lattice trembled. Domain integrity. 49% right pointing arrow, 27% right pointing arrow, 18%. Naruto, Hinata warned, and he heard concern stitched to trust. I know, he said. The world sharpened to a line. Asahi came, not with a spear this time, but with 10 small blades of instruction dancing in the air around his arms like obedient birds. Naruto didn't match numbers. He reached down where the gate sat in. For the first time, pushed it open without asking the sky for permission. The plate went dark. Not night. Not a stolen noon. A held breath. The kind you take before Chusi. Ing to say I love you or I'm sorry or both. Sovereignty test. Hold the domain without ambient darkness. Cost. You. He took the cost. He let it pull at his ribs and his badly healed places and his pride, and he stood. The lattice solidified. Asahi's blades hit it and skittered and sparked and made no impression. Not because they were weak, but because for one breath the room belonged to Naruto and had decided to be reasonable. Asahi stepped into that breath and did the only thing you can do when someone else's room is the thing saving lives. He stopped trying to redecorate. He drove a single, clean thrust at Naruto's heart. Naruto turned his shoulder and took the cut-along muscle instead. He didn't grunt because sound is leverage in fights like this and he couldn't afford to spend it. He flicked the shadow spear up under Asahi's guard and caught the light spear at the haft. They locked there, close, not struggling, not quite. Two men holding two ideas between their palms and trying not to break either on accident. You can end me, Asahi said, very quiet. I can beat you, Naruto corrected, and the distinction mattered only because he'd made it matter. Different thing. Asahi looked over Naruto's shoulder, to Hinata standing with her feet set and her eyes white, to Tamari grinning like wind with teeth, to Karen with blood at the corner of her mouth and joy in her face, to Yugao with her blade low and sure, to Xian with both hands around a bell rope in her head and the world on the other end. He looked back. You'll be hated more for mercy, he said, not unkind. I'm used to poorly chosen opinions. Naruto said, and let go. Not of the spear, of the need to finish this in a shape other people would recognize as victory. He took Asahi's blade and turned it, using the shish Ado beams not as cage but as scaffolding. He pinned the spear. He didn't pin the man. He didn't have to. He stepped back and left space between them and set his hands out to show he could. The temple noticed first. The pillars dimmed a fraction. The sky relented. The wind eased. The water that had been falling upside and decided down was just as dignified. Asahi looked at the space Naruto had offered and did the hardest thing for any devout man with a ledger. He didn't fill it with a command. Light thinned around his shoulders. The wings lost their starch. He looked down at his hands as if someone had changed their weight as a prank. Naruto felt the prompt arrive like a note slid into a pocket he hadn't known was there. Sovereignty recognized. You may open the domain it out ambient darkness for a breath. A breath is longer than most men think. He exhaled. Longer than he'd earned, and let the plate breathe with him. Behind Asahi, on the outer platforms, the remaining purifiers took the moment like a verdict. Some dropped their discs. Some ran. One went to his knees without any word telling him to. Tsunade would be furious if he brought home a new pile of believers. She'd brew tea anyway. Asahi released the spear. It fell point first and stuck in the stone with a small, ordinary sound. He stepped back and into the light that had softened to a practical kind. This isn't over, he said. And it was the least cliché he had ever sounded. He said it like a responsible man telling a friend he would come back with better data. It better not be, Naruto said. I'm building rooms. You can stop by. Check my windows. Quote. Asahi's mouth almost smiled. Teach your people not to be monsters, he said, as if requesting an errand. And I'll teach mine not to be laws. Deal, Naruto said, and meant it so hard it hurt. Asahi turned. The light folded him up like a careful letter. He was gone without any of the terrible romance of vanishing men. Just a man walking off to think. The pillars dimmed to lamps. The temple let off a breath it had forgotten to take. The sky returned to being sky. Careless, big-hearted, blue. Naruto sagged and Karen's hand landed like an order. Don't. He obeyed. Hinata was there the next second, gentle and unapologetic. She pressed 2 fingers into his side, then her palm into his cheek, thumb brushing the thin line Asahi had given him. You're bleeding, she said. Light paper cut, he said, and she laughed, small and scandalous up here on a god's porch. Tamari blew hair off her forehead. If anyone asks, she announced to the air, we tell them we vandalized a celestial gazebo. Put it in your report, Yugao said without a hint of humor. Tsunade loves architectural metaphors. She tucked her bell away and stared at the pillars like A.T. Each grading a student she hadn't expected to like. We made a gate at the valley, she said to Naruto, but this, she gestured at the sky that had just agreed to be polite, this is not a sanctuary. It's a conversation. Don't stop having it. Won't, he said, and only then let his shoulders give a little. They walked off the center plate not like a victorious army, not like saints. Like tired friends down off a roof. The platforms obliged them by drifting closer. On the last one before the drop back into cloud, Hinata caught his wrist. Wait, she said, quiet, before anyone could turn the moment into an escape. She held him there, just a breath, just long enough that it became a thing, choice, not accident. I wanted. He didn't make her finish. He'd been saying stand all day. It was time to say something else. He set his free hand over hers and returned a pressure that had been deferred too long. I know, he said. Me too. It wasn't fireworks. It didn't need to be. Tamari pretended not to see and smiled like a sister. Karen bumped Yugao with her shoulder and whispered, finally, and Yugao said nothing at all because sometimes silence is the right kind of help. They descend. D threw white back into weather and then into the thin blue that belongs to early, relieved mornings. The valley bell rang once as if checking attendance. Sheehan bowed to it with absently perfect res. Pecton then bullied 2 purifiers who had decided to repent into carrying blankets for refugees. By noon they were on the road to Konoha, and by late afternoon they were in the village among people who had found a way to laugh while sweeping glass out of a square. A boy with plums ran up and yelled, he did it again. He put a hat on the sun. Small hat, Naruto said, deadpan. Saving the big one for my birthday. Tsunade didn't hug him in the tower. She made a face at his bandage and said, "You're getting blood on my floor," and then leaned both hands on the desk and looked like a woman who had bet right on a horse she pretended not to like. "Report," she said, and listened as if listening were a jutsu no one else had mastered. When he finished, she touched 2 fingers to the line on high. S cheek with the clinical gentleness she saved for the ones she couldn't scold. "If you're going to be king of anything," she said, "be king of outcomes. Don't start wearing crowns." "Bad for my hair," Naruto said. "Bad for your head," she corrected. "Go sleep. And tell your friends I said they did good work." "I'll tell them you said nothing," he said cheerfully. Night came without drama. The ring they'd hung over Konoha at noon faded into rumor. Lanterns flicked on in orderly rows. The street noodle stall steamed like a good luck charm someone forgot to put away. Naruto climbed the wall because he always did. And because the top of the village is where the day shakes out of him best. Tamari arrived first, carrying skewer sticks and a swagger. Karen came next, shamelessly eating from his bowl. Yugao stood with her back to the parapet and let her sword hang so it wouldn't throw a shadow people would have to dodge. Shion, of all people, brought tea so strong it might have counted as a weapon. Hinata came last and stood at his side, close enough their sleeves touched. They watched the sun leak out of the world and leave the good parts behind. Shadows stretched long across the training fields, soft at the edges. Kids ran into them and out, chasing each other and not noticing night unless it was useful for hiding. "Not kneeling," Naruto said, low, a joke and a vow. Hinata slipped her hand into his. No announcement, no bravado. Fingers, warm and steady, lacing his. He tightened and didn't let go. Tamari raised her skewer like a toast. "To vandalizing gazebos," she said. "To writing our own windows," Shion amended. "To stealing hats," Karen grinned. Yugao, dry as ever. "To reports Tsunade won't read." They laughed, small, human sounds that didn't need bells or laws to mean something. Down below, a man in a white cloak, collar plain, disc gone, helped a shopkeeper put a new frame up where the old sign had burned. Across the street, an old woman argued with a boy about the right way to sweep. Life, obnoxious and holy, put chairs back where they belonged. Naruto leaned into the wall because he could, because his body was his and the night wasn't a command, just a room he'd learned how to keep. He looked at the faces beside him and let the world be big without letting it be bigger than them. The bell inside his chest rang once, exact. He didn't bow to it. He grinned. The night was his. It didn't own him. Chapter 5 End.